A woman sold for $40. A ranch buried in snow and violence. A war that will either destroy her or forge her into something unbreakable. When Elena Marquez stepped off that frozen wagon in the dead of winter, she had nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of rage. The man who bought her didn't want a wife. He wanted someone to keep his children from starving. But what Victor Crow and his gunmen didn't know was that Elena had survived worse than cold and bullets. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The wagon creaked like bones breaking under the weight of ice and wind. Elena sat in the back, wrapped in a threadbare blanket that did nothing against the cold cutting through the mountain pass. Her breath came out in white clouds, disappearing into the gray violence of the storm around her. She'd stopped shivering an hour ago. That wasn't a good sign. The driver hadn't spoken since they left Santa Fe 3 days prior. Just an old Mexican man with a face like cracked leather and eyes that had seen too much to care about one more unwanted woman being hauled across the territory. Elena didn't blame him. She wouldn't have talked to herself either. She'd been traded. Not married off with ceremony or even the pretense of choice. Traded. $40. That's what her uncle had accepted from a man she'd never met, a rancher from somewhere north of Tierra Amarilla who needed help and couldn't afford to be particular about where it came from. "Almost there," the driver said suddenly, his voice rough as the wind. He didn't look back at her. Elena pulled the blanket tighter and stared at the white emptiness ahead. Almost where? Almost to what? She'd asked those questions for 3 days and gotten nothing but silence and cold. The mountains pressed in on both sides of the narrow trail, massive walls of stone and snow that seemed to swallow the gray sky. Pine trees bent under the weight of ice, their branches scraping against each other with sounds like whispered warnings. This wasn't country meant for people. It was country that killed people who got too comfortable. Elena had grown up in Albuquerque, in a small house that always smelled like her mother's cooking and her father's tobacco. That was before the fever took them both within a week of each other, before her uncle moved in and decided she was more valuable as currency than family, before she learned that being a woman with no money and no protection meant being property. The wagon lurched to the right, nearly tipping. Elena grabbed the side rail, her fingers numb inside thin gloves. The driver cursed in Spanish, pulling hard on the reins. The horse, a tired gray mare that looked as done with this journey as Elena felt, planted her hooves and stopped. "What's wrong?" Elena called over the wind. "Bridge is out." The driver pointed ahead where the trail should have crossed a narrow ravine. Should have. Instead, there was just empty air and broken timber half buried in snow. Storm must have taken it. So what do we do? Go around, add another 2 hours. He spat into the snow. Maybe 3 in this weather. 3 more hours. Elena's feet had lost feeling before noon. Her hands weren't far behind. She nodded anyway because what else was there to do? Turn back? To what? Her uncle's house where she'd been one more mouth he didn't want to feed, where he'd sold her like a piece of furniture. The driver guided the wagon along a steep detour that wound higher into the mountains. The wind got meaner. The snow got thicker. Elena closed her eyes and tried to remember what warmth felt like. She must have dozed off because when the wagon finally stopped, the sky had gone from gray to the kind of deep blue-black that meant night was coming fast. Elena opened her eyes and saw a house. No, not a house. A building. Something that had maybe been a house once, but now looked like it was barely holding itself together against the mountain trying to crush it. Wood siding weathered to the color of old bones. A roof that sagged in the middle like a broken back. Windows dark as empty eye sockets. "This is it?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she wanted. The driver was already climbing down. "This is it." Elena stood on shaking legs and nearly fell. The driver caught her elbow, the first time he'd touched her the entire trip, and steadied her until she found her balance. Then he let go and walked to the front door. He knocked. 3 solid hits that echoed across the snow. Nothing happened. He knocked again. The door opened. A man stood in the frame, backlit by weak firelight from inside. Tall, broad shoulders, face hidden in shadow. He looked at the driver, then passed him to Elena still standing by the wagon. "You Caleb Mercer?" the driver asked. "I am." "Got your delivery." Delivery. Like she was a sack of grain. Elena's jaw tightened, but she didn't move. Caleb Mercer stepped out onto the porch. The firelight caught his face. Late 30s, maybe 40. Hard features made harder by weather and whatever else life had done to him. Dark hair going gray at the temples, eyes that looked at Elena with all the warmth of the snow around them. "She healthy?" Mercer asked. "Healthy enough. Made the trip without complaint." "She got a name?" "Elena Marquez." Mercer looked at her directly for the first time. Elena lifted her chin and looked back. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her scared, even if she was. "Can she work?" Mercer asked the driver, still not addressing Elena herself. "That's what you paid for." Mercer pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket and tossed it to the driver. It landed with a heavy clink. The driver caught it, weighed it in his hand, and nodded. "Pleasure doing business," he turned to Elena. "Good luck." Then he climbed back onto the wagon and was gone before Elena could think of anything to say. The sound of hooves and wheels faded into the storm until there was nothing but wind and the man standing on the porch watching her. "You coming in or are you planning to freeze?" Mercer's voice was flat. No invitation in it, just a statement of fact. Elena picked up the single canvas bag that held everything she owned and walked toward the house. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Each step took effort. She climbed the 3 porch steps and stopped in front of him. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the scar cutting through his left eyebrow, the way his jaw was set like he was always bracing for bad news. "I'm Elena," she said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "I know. I'm Caleb." He stepped aside. "Get inside before you catch your death." The inside of the house wasn't much warmer than outside. A fireplace struggled against the drafts coming through gaps in the walls. The main room held a rough wooden table, a few chairs that didn't match, and the kind of emptiness that comes when people stop caring about making a place feel like home. 3 children sat at the table. A boy, maybe 14 or 15, with his father's dark hair and his father's hard eyes. A girl around 10 with braids coming loose and a dress that had been mended so many times it was more patched than original fabric. And a small boy, couldn't be more than 5, who stared at Elena with huge eyes like she was some kind of creature he'd never seen before. "Kids, this is Elena," Caleb said. "She's going to be staying with us." The older boy's face went dark. "The hell she is." "Wyatt," Caleb's voice dropped to something dangerous. "Watch your mouth. You bring some stranger into Mama's house and expect me to what? Welcome her?" Wyatt stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "She's not our mother. She's never going to be our mother." "Sit down." "No." Wyatt grabbed a coat from a hook by the door. "I'm going to the barn." He shoved past Elena hard enough that she had to step back. The door slammed behind him. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. The little girl looked at Elena with something between curiosity and fear. The small boy had started crying silently, tears running down his cheeks while he tried not to make any noise. "That's Mary," Caleb said, nodding to the girl. "And that's Thomas. Wyatt you just met." Elena set down her bag. "He's scared. He's angry." Same thing most of the time. Caleb looked at her with something that might have been surprise, or maybe just reassessment. "You hungry?" "I could eat. There's beans in the pot. Help yourself." He turned to the children. "Mary, get her a bowl. Thomas, stop that crying. Nothing to cry about." Thomas tried to stop, but that just made the silent tears come faster. Mary got up and pulled a chipped bowl from a shelf, filled it with beans from a pot hanging over the fire, and handed it to Elena without making eye contact. "Thank you," Elena said. Mary nodded and sat back down. Elena took the bowl to the table and sat in the chair Wyatt had abandoned. The beans were thin and under-seasoned, but they were hot, and she was too hungry to care. She ate slowly, aware of everyone watching her. "Your mama," Elena said quietly, looking at the beans instead of the children. "When did she pass?" Silence. Then Mary spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. 8 months ago. "I'm sorry." "Why?" Mary's eyes were suddenly sharp. "You didn't know her." "No, but I know what it's like to lose a mother." Mary looked away. Thomas had stopped crying, but he hadn't stopped staring. Caleb stood by the fire with his back to them, but Elena could tell he was listening to every word. "There's a room off the kitchen," Caleb said without turning around. It's small, but it's got a bed. That's yours. And the children? Where do they sleep? Wyatt's in the loft. Mary and Thomas share the other bedroom. Elena nodded and kept eating. The beans didn't get any better, but they filled the empty space in her stomach. When she finished, she stood and took the bowl to a bucket of water sitting on a counter. She washed it along with the spoon, dried both with a rag that had seen better days, and put them back where they belonged. You don't have to do that, Caleb said. I know. Elena looked around the kitchen, really looked. Dishes stacked unwashed in corners. Flour scattered on the counter from something baked days or weeks ago. The floor hadn't seen a broom in longer than that. But I'm going to anyway. It's late. You should rest. I've been resting for 3 days. I'd rather be useful. Something flickered across Caleb's face. Not quite approval, not quite anything Elena could name. He nodded once and went back to staring at the fire. Elena found the broom in a corner and started sweeping. Mary watched her for a minute, then got up and started collecting the dirty dishes. Together they worked in silence while Thomas fell asleep at the table and Caleb stood like a statue by the fire. An hour later, the kitchen looked less like a place that had given up and more like a place where people lived. Elena's arms ached and her feet still hadn't fully recovered from the cold, but she felt better than she had in days. I'm going to check on the animals, Caleb said suddenly. He pulled on a heavy coat and walked out into the night. Mary looked at Elena. He does that. Goes out to the barn when he doesn't want to be around people. Does he do it a lot? Every night since Mama died. Elena sat down at the table. What was she like? Your mama? Mary's expression closed off. Why do you want to know? Because she mattered to you. That makes her worth knowing about. Mary studied Elena's face like she was looking for the lie. Whatever she found made her soften just a little. She used to sing when she was cooking or mending or just sitting with us. She knew all these old songs from when she was little. Your father doesn't sing much, I'm guessing. Pa doesn't do much of anything anymore. Just work and stare at the fire. Mary's voice got quieter. Wyatt says it's because he's given up. Says we're all just waiting to starve or freeze or both. What do you think? I think Wyatt's mean when he's scared, and I think you're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone older, someone harder. Mary picked at a splinter in the table. Someone who wouldn't ask about Mama. Elena reached over and gently took the little boy, Thomas, from where he'd slumped over in his chair. He was light. Too light for a child his age. She carried him toward the bedroom Mary had pointed to earlier. Where are you taking him? Mary's voice had an edge. To bed. He's exhausted. I can do it. I know you can. Elena kept walking. But you've been doing it alone for 8 months. You're allowed to let someone help. She found the bedroom. 2 narrow beds with thin blankets. A window with cloth stuffed in the gaps to keep the wind out. Elena laid Thomas on the smaller bed and pulled the blanket up to his chin. He didn't wake. When she turned around, Mary was standing in the doorway. He has nightmares, Mary said. Almost every night. He wakes up crying for Mama, and I have to... Her voice broke. I have to tell him she's not coming back. Every single night. Elena walked over and put a hand on Mary's shoulder. You've been very brave. I don't feel brave. Brave people never do. Mary looked up at her. In the dim light from the other room, her eyes were huge and wet. Are you going to leave? When you see how bad it is here? Are you going to run away like everyone says you will? Who's everyone? Wyatt. He says you'll run the first chance you get. Says no one would stay here unless they were forced to. Elena thought about the wagon disappearing into the storm. About her uncle's house in Albuquerque. About all the places she'd been, and none of them had wanted her. I've got nowhere to run to, Mary. This is it for me. Might as well make it work. That's not the same as wanting to stay. No, it's not. Elena squeezed her shoulder. But sometimes wanting comes later, after you've put in the work. Mary nodded slowly. She didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. You should know. Pa doesn't talk much. And when he does, he doesn't always mean what he says. What does that mean? It means he told Wyatt he'd never replace Mama. Told us all that. Then a month later, he sent for you. Mary's jaw tightened. So Wyatt thinks Pa's a liar, and he thinks you're here to erase Mama like she never mattered. I can't erase someone I never knew, and I wouldn't want to. Tell that to Wyatt. I will, when he's ready to listen. He's not going to be ready, not for a long time. Mary turned to go. Your room is through the kitchen. There's blankets in the chest at the foot of the bed. They're not much, but they're better than nothing. Mary. The girl stopped. Thank you, Elena said, for telling me the truth. Mary's expression softened just a fraction. Mama used to say the truth was the only thing worth holding on to when everything else fell apart. I figure she was right about that. Then she was gone, retreating to her own bed and leaving Elena alone in the dark hallway. Elena found her room. It was small, like Caleb had said. Barely enough space for the narrow bed and a chest and a small table with a cracked mirror. But it had a door that closed and a window that looked out toward the mountains, and right now that felt like more than she'd had in months. She opened the chest and pulled out 2 heavy blankets that smelled like cedar and dust. She spread them on the bed and sat down. The mattress was thin, but it was better than the wagon bed she'd been sleeping on. Through the walls, she could hear the wind picking up again. Somewhere outside, a shutter banged against the house in an irregular rhythm. Elena closed her eyes and tried to quiet the thoughts racing through her head. She'd been bought, traded like livestock to a man who didn't want her, to care for children who didn't trust her, in a house that was barely surviving the winter. And somewhere out there in the barn was a boy who hated her for existing. Elena opened her eyes and looked at her hands. They were rough from work, scarred from accidents and hard living. Her mother's hands had been soft, always smelling like soap and rosemary. Elena wondered what her mother would think of her now. The door opened without warning. Elena jumped to her feet. Caleb stood in the doorway, snow melting in his hair. Didn't mean to startle you. It's your house. It is. He looked around the small room like he was seeing it for the first time. My wife used to use this room for sewing before. Before she died, Elena thought. Before everything fell apart. I'll take care of it, Elena said. The room, the house, the children. That's what you're here for. I know. Caleb's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to say. Wyatt's angry. He's going to make this hard on you. Mary told me. Did she tell you why? She said you promised not to replace their mother. Then you brought me here. Caleb's expression hardened. I didn't replace her. I can't afford to keep this place running and raise 3 kids alone. I needed help. That's all you are. Help. The word should have stung, but Elena had heard worse. I understand. Do you? He took a step into the room. Because I need you to understand that whatever you think this is going to be, it's not. This isn't a marriage. This isn't a family. This is an arrangement. You work. You get a roof and food. That's the deal. I wasn't expecting anything else. Good. He turned to leave, then stopped. One more thing. Stay out of my business. I see you trying to mother my kids or get close to them. We're going to have a problem. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. You brought me here to take care of them. How am I supposed to do that and stay away from them? You feed them. You keep the house clean. You make sure they don't freeze. But their mother is dead and buried, and I don't need some stranger trying to fill shoes that can't be filled. You understand me? Yes. Do you? Elena met his eyes and held them. I understand that you're scared of letting anyone get close because losing your wife broke something in you. I understand that you're pushing everyone away, including your own children, because it's easier than feeling whatever you're feeling. And I understand that bringing me here was the only way you could admit you need help without actually having to ask for it. Caleb's face went white, then red. You don't know a damn thing about me. You're right, I don't. Elena sat back down on the bed. But I know grief. And I know what it looks like when someone's drowning and too proud to grab the rope. I didn't ask for your opinion. No, you asked for help, so here I am. They stared at each other across the small room. Outside, the wind howled and the shutter kept banging, and somewhere in the house a child cried out in his sleep. Finally, Caleb stepped back into the hallway. We start early here, before dawn. Don't oversleep. Then he was gone, pulling the door shut behind him with more force than necessary. Elena lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. Water stains marked the wood in strange patterns that looked like maps to nowhere. She pulled the blankets up and tried to get warm. Sleep didn't come easy. Every time she started to drift off, something would jolt her awake. The wind, the shutter. the unfamiliar sounds of a house settling against the cold. Once she heard footsteps in the loft above her, Wyatt, probably, pacing instead of sleeping. Finally, somewhere in the darkest hours before dawn, exhaustion won, and she fell into a restless sleep filled with dreams of snow and houses that collapsed when you looked at them too hard. She woke to someone shaking her shoulder. Elena's eyes flew open and she grabbed the wrist of whoever was touching her, ready to fight. "Easy," Mary jumped back. "Pa sent me to wake you. Sun's almost up." Elena released her and sat up. Her whole body ached from the cold and the journey and sleeping on the thin mattress. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to grab you." "It's okay." Mary looked at her with new interest. "You move fast." "Old habit." Elena swung her legs out of bed. "What needs doing?" "Everything. Breakfast, feeding the chickens, checking the animals, firewood." Mary rattled off the list like she'd memorized it through repetition. "Pa's already out fixing the fence line. Wyatt's supposed to be helping, but he's still in the barn sulking." "And Thomas?" "Still asleep. He doesn't wake up easy." Elena stood and pulled on her dress from yesterday. It was wrinkled and stiff from the cold, but it was all she had that was clean. "Show me where everything is. The kitchen, the chickens, the woodpile. I'll figure it out from there." Mary led her through the house, pointing out supplies and explaining the daily routine in a voice that was trying hard to sound older than 10 years old. The pantry was nearly empty. A few sacks of flour and beans, some dried meat that looked like it had seen better days, a jar of something that might have been preserves once but now looked suspicious. "Is this all you have?" Elena asked. Mary nodded. "Pa says the supply wagon comes through once a month. It's supposed to come next week, but the snow's been bad. Sometimes it doesn't make it." "What do you do then?" "Go hungry, or eat less." Mary said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Mama used to make things stretch. She could take nothing and make it into something. Pa tries, but he's not as good at it." Elena looked at the pathetic supplies and did math in her head. If the wagon didn't come, they'd run out of food in less than a week. Maybe less if they were feeding 5 people instead of 4. "All right," Elena said. "Let's see what we can do." She built up the fire and put on water to boil. While it heated, she went through the pantry more carefully and found things Mary had missed. A handful of dried apples, some oats that were old but still good, a small tin of lard. By the time Caleb came in from outside, Elena had breakfast on the table. Oatmeal with the dried apples chopped into it. Biscuits made from the last of the flour and lard. It wasn't much, but it was hot, and it was more than they'd been eating. Caleb looked at the food, then at Elena. "Where'd this come from?" "The pantry." "I looked in the pantry yesterday. There wasn't enough for this." "There was. Just had to look harder." Elena poured him coffee from the pot she'd found buried in a cabinet. "Sit. Eat while it's hot." Mary was already eating, her eyes wide like she'd forgotten food could taste like something other than bland survival. Thomas had woken up and was picking at the oatmeal with his fingers, too young or too hungry to bother with a spoon. "Wyatt," Caleb called toward the loft. "Get down here." No response. "Wyatt?" Footsteps on the ladder. Then Wyatt appeared, his hair sticking up and his eyes red like he hadn't slept. He looked at the table, at Elena, and his expression closed off. "I'm not hungry. Sit down and eat." "I said I'm not. I don't care what you said. Sit down." They stared at each other. Father and son, locked in a battle of wills that Elena recognized from every fight she'd ever had with her own stubborn relatives. Finally, Wyatt sat, but he didn't touch the food. Elena filled a bowl and set it in front of him. "Eat or don't. Up to you. But the food's there if you want it." "I don't want anything from you." "Good thing it's not from me then. It's from your father's pantry. I just put it together." Wyatt's jaw clenched, but he picked up the spoon. He ate mechanically, not looking at anyone, each bite an act of defiance softened only by hunger. They finished breakfast in silence. When the bowls were empty, Caleb stood. "Wyatt, you're with me today. We've got fence line that won't fix itself." "What about her?" Wyatt jerked his head toward Elena. "Her name is Elena," Caleb said, "and she's got her own work to do." "Doing what? Playing house?" Caleb's hand came down on the table hard enough to make the dishes jump. "One more word, and you can spend the day in the barn without supper. Your choice." Wyatt stood, grabbed his coat, and walked out. Caleb followed after a pause, but not before looking back at Elena with something that might have been apologetic. When they were gone, Mary started collecting dishes. "Don't mind Wyatt, he's just scared," Elena finished. "I know." "Are you?" Elena thought about it. "Yeah, I'm terrified." Mary looked surprised. "You don't seem scared." "That's because being scared and showing it are two different things." Elena took the dishes from Mary's hands. "Go play with Thomas, or read, or do whatever you want to do that isn't work." "But the dishes will still be here in an hour. Go on." Mary hesitated, then nodded and went to where Thomas was building something with blocks that had been carved from scrap wood. Elena watched them for a moment. The little boy showing his sister his creation. Mary praising it, even though it was just blocks stacked into a tower that would fall over any second. Then Elena turned back to the kitchen and got to work. She spent the morning learning the house, where things belonged, what was broken and what was just worn. She found a needle and thread and spent an hour mending clothes that had been piling up. She scrubbed the floor until her knees ached. She inventoried every scrap of food and made a list of what they'd need when the wagon came. If it came. By midday, the house looked different. Not perfect, not even good, but better. Like someone gave a damn about it again. Elena made soup for lunch from the dried meat and the last of the vegetables she'd found in a cold cellar out back. It was thin, but it was warm, and when Caleb and Wyatt came in from the cold, they ate without complaint. That afternoon, Elena tackled the children's room. She washed their blankets in hot water and hung them by the fire to dry. She organized their few clothes and mended the tears. She found a small wooden horse under Thomas's bed, broken in half. She glued it back together with flour paste and left it on his pillow. When Thomas found it later, he cried. Not sad crying, happy crying. He held the horse like it was made of gold and showed it to Mary, who hugged him tight. Elena watched from the doorway and felt something crack in her chest. That night, Wyatt didn't come to supper. Caleb went to get him from the barn, but came back alone. His face dark with anger or frustration or both. "Let him miss a meal," Caleb said. "Maybe it'll teach him something." But Elena saw the way he looked toward the door. The way he listened for footsteps that didn't come. He was worried. He just didn't know how to show it without seeming weak. After the children went to bed, Elena sat by the fire and worked on mending one of Caleb's shirts. The sleeve had torn along the seam and the fabric was worn thin, but it could be saved. Caleb came and sat across from her, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. "You don't have to do that." "I know. But you're doing it anyway. Seems wasteful to throw away a perfectly good shirt just because it needs mending." He watched her works for a minute. "My wife used to sit right there, mending things." Elena didn't stop stitching. "I'm not trying to be her." "I know." He was quiet for a while. "But it's strange, seeing someone in her spot. I can move." "No, stay." He took a drink of the cold coffee and grimaced. "You did good today. The kids, they seemed lighter, less burdened. They're good kids. They just needed someone to see them." "I see them." "Do you?" Elena tied off the thread and bit it clean. "Or do you see ghosts?" Caleb's face went hard. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Maybe not." Elena folded the shirt and set it aside. "But I know what it looks like when someone's so busy grieving they forget to live. She was my wife. And she's gone. But those kids in there, they're still here. And they need a father who can do more than stare at fences and hide in barns." Caleb stood up so fast his chair tipped backward. "You've been here 1 day. 1! And you think you can tell me how to raise my children?" Elena stood too. "I think someone needs to, because right now you're not raising them. You're just making sure they don't die. And there's a difference." His hand clenched into a fist. For a second, Elena thought he might hit her. She stood her ground, ready for it. But he didn't. He just stared at her with eyes full of something raw and painful, then turned and walked out of the house into the night. Elena sat back down. Her hands were shaking. She'd pushed too hard, too fast. She knew that. But watching those children try to hold together a house that was falling apart, watching a father disappear into grief while his kids starved for attention, she couldn't just stand by and say nothing. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind was picking up again. Elena picked up another shirt and got back to work. An hour later, the door opened. Wyatt stood there, snow in his hair, his face red from cold and something else. He looked at Elena like he was seeing her for the first time. "You shouldn't have said that to him," Wyatt said quietly. "Probably not. He loved her more than anything." "I know." "Then why, because love doesn't mean you get to stop being a father." Elena set down the mending, and because someone needed to say it. Wyatt's hands balled into fists. "You don't get to come in here and tell us how to feel. You don't get to judge us." "You're right, I don't." Elena stood and walked to the kitchen. She came back with a bowl of soup she'd kept warm. "But I can make sure you eat. Sit." "I'm not—" "Sit down, Wyatt." Something in her voice made him listen. He sat. Elena put the bowl in front of him and a spoon beside it. "Eat, then go to bed. Tomorrow's going to come whether we're ready or not." Wyatt stared at the soup. "Why do you care?" "Because I'm here. And I don't know how to be anywhere without caring." He ate. Slowly at first, then faster when he realized how hungry he actually was. When the bowl was empty, he stood and walked to the loft without another word. Elena cleaned up the kitchen, banked the fire, and went to her small room. She lay in bed and listened to the house settle around her. Footsteps in the loft, Mary's voice soothing Thomas through another nightmare. The front door opening and closing as Caleb finally came back inside. Tomorrow would be another day of walking on knives. Another day of trying to find her place in a house that didn't want her and a family that wasn't hers. But she'd survived worse. And somewhere between the mending and the cooking and the standing up to men who thought they could silence her with anger, Elena had made a decision. She wasn't leaving. Not yet. Maybe not ever. This broken house in the middle of frozen mountains might kill her. The winter might claim her. The hatred in Wyatt's eyes might never soften. But she'd been traded and sold and treated like she was worth nothing for too long. Here at least she could be useful. Here at least she could fight. And if that wasn't home, it was close enough. The second week came with colder winds and a sky that never seemed to lift above gray. Elena woke each morning before dawn, her breath visible in the dark room, and forced herself out from under the blankets into air that felt like glass breaking against her skin. The house had settled into a rhythm, not comfortable, not easy, but a rhythm nonetheless. She'd learned which floorboards creaked, which door hinges needed oil, where the drafts came in worst. She'd learned that Thomas wouldn't eat anything green, that Mary hoarded bread under her pillow because she was terrified of going hungry, and that Wyatt would rather freeze than accept a blanket from Elena's hands. Caleb remained distant. He worked from sunrise to long past dark, coming in only to eat meals he barely tasted before disappearing back outside or sitting by the fire in silence so complete it felt like a wall. When he did speak, it was about practical things. The fence, the animals, the roof that needed patching before the next storm. He never mentioned their argument, neither did Elena. But something had shifted. Small things. He'd stopped watching her like she might steal the silverware. He'd started leaving his coffee cup on the counter instead of washing it himself, a tiny surrender to her presence. Once, when she'd burned her hand on the stove, he'd brought her snow wrapped in cloth without being asked. It wasn't trust, but it wasn't complete hostility either. The morning the supply wagon was supposed to arrive, Elena stood at the window watching the road. The sky looked mean, clouds piled up like dirty wool, and the temperature had dropped so low the glass had frost patterns that looked like skeletal hands reaching across the pane. "It's not coming," Mary said from behind her. She was braiding her own hair, her small fingers working with the competence of someone who'd been doing it alone for too long. "Not in this weather. How long can we stretch what we have?" Mary's hand stopped moving. "Maybe 4 days, if we're careful. And if we're not careful? 2. Elena turned from the window. Thomas was still asleep, curled under blankets in the chair by the fire. Wyatt was in the loft. She could hear him moving around, getting ready for another day of avoiding her while working alongside his father. "Where's the closest town?" Elena asked. "Tierra Amarilla, maybe 15 miles south." "Your father ever go there for supplies?" "Sometimes, when the wagon doesn't come." Mary finished her braid and tied it with a strip of cloth. "But the road's bad this time of year, and he won't leave us alone that long, not since Mama died." Elena walked to the pantry and took inventory again. She'd been rationing carefully, but feeding 5 people on scraps, and hope could only work for so long. They had maybe a week of beans, less than that of flour. The dried meat was almost gone. If the wagon didn't come and Caleb didn't make the trip to town, they'd be eating snow and wishes by the end of the month. The front door opened. Caleb came in with Wyatt behind him, both covered in snow that hadn't been falling when Elena last looked outside. Caleb's face was set in hard lines. "Storm's coming," he said, shaking snow from his coat. "Big one. We need to get the animals secured and bring in every piece of wood we can carry. Wyatt, you handle the chickens. I'll get the horses and the cow into the barn." "What about me?" Elena asked. Caleb looked at her like he'd forgotten she could do more than cook. "You ever split firewood?" "I've split firewood." "There's an axe by the woodpile. Stack what you can near the door. We're going to need it." He was gone again before she could respond. Wyatt followed without looking at her, and Elena was left standing in the kitchen with Mary watching her with worried eyes. "The storms here get bad," Mary said quietly. "Last winter one lasted 4 days. We couldn't even open the door. The snow was up to the windows." "Did you have enough food?" Mary didn't answer. She didn't have to. Elena pulled on the heaviest coat she could find, one of Caleb's that hung to her knees, and wrapped a scarf around her face. Outside, the wind had teeth. It bit through the coat like the fabric was made of paper. The woodpile sat behind the house, half buried in old snow, with new snow already starting to cover it. Elena grabbed the axe and got to work. Her hands were clumsy in the cold, but she found the rhythm quickly. Lift, swing, split. The wood cracked apart with sounds like bones breaking. She worked until her arms shook and her back screamed. Each piece she split, she carried to the pile by the door, then back to split more. The wind got stronger. The snow got heavier. Elena kept working. "You're doing it wrong." She turned. Wyatt stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, snow gathering on his shoulders. "I'm splitting wood. There's not a lot of ways to do it wrong." "You're wasting energy, lifting too high." He walked over and took the axe from her hands before she could protest. "Like this. Let the weight of the axe do the work. You're just guiding it." He demonstrated. The axe came down clean and the log split perfectly. He handed the axe back and stood there watching. "Thank you," Elena said. Wyatt shrugged. "Don't want you hurting yourself. Then we'd have to do your work too." He walked away before she could respond, but Elena caught something in his voice. Not kindness exactly, but not cruelty either. Just a boy trying to be hard because being soft had cost him too much already. She split wood until her hands were numb, and the pile by the door was tall enough to last a week. Then she went inside to find the house transformed. Caleb and Wyatt had stuffed cloth into every gap around the windows and doors. Mary had filled every pot and bucket with water. Thomas was arranging blankets into what looked like a nest in the corner. "Good," Caleb said when he saw the wood. "That should hold us. Everyone inside. Nobody goes out once the storm hits proper." They spent the rest of the daylight preparing. Elena cooked a large pot of stew with the last of the vegetables and half the remaining dried meat. If they were going to be trapped inside for days, she wanted them to start with something substantial. While it simmered, she baked bread using most of the flour and the last of the lard. The smell filled the house, and for a moment it almost felt normal. By the time they sat down to eat, the wind outside sounded like something alive and angry. The windows rattled, the walls creaked. Snow piled against the door so fast Elena could watch it rising. They ate in silence. Even Thomas seemed to understand this wasn't a time for talking. When the meal was finished, Caleb stood and checked the doors again, testing the cloths they'd stuffed in the gaps. "We stay warm, we stay fed, we wait it out," he said. "Everyone understand?" 3 heads nodded. "Mary, you and Thomas sleep in here tonight, closer to the fire. Wyatt, same. We need to conserve heat." Elena expected Wyatt to argue, but he just nodded and pulled blankets down from the loft. They arranged sleeping spaces around the fireplace while the storm outside built itself into something that sounded like the end of the world. That night, Elena lay on the floor near the kitchen, wrapped in blankets but still cold. She could hear the others breathing in the darkness. Thomas whimpering in his sleep, Mary shushing him, Wyatt shifting restlessly, Caleb sitting by the fire, keeping watch over nothing and everything. The storm hit full force near midnight. The wind stopped sounding like wind and started sounding like screaming. Something crashed outside, a shutter torn loose or a branch ripped from a tree. The house shook. Thomas started crying, not the quiet crying he usually did, but loud, terrified sobs that filled the room. "Mama, he cried. "I want Mama." Mary tried to comfort him, but he was too far gone, lost in fear and grief and the overwhelming sound of the storm trying to tear the house apart. Elena stood and walked over to where Thomas thrashed under his blankets. She knelt down and gathered him into her arms. He fought her at first, but she held on, rocking him gently. "I know," she murmured. "I know you're scared. I know you want your mama. I know." "She's not here," Thomas sobbed into her shoulder. "She's not coming back." "No, she's not." Elena didn't lie to him. "But you're here, and Mary's here, and your pa and your brother, and me. We're all here, and we're not going anywhere." "Promise?" Elena looked up and found Caleb watching her from across the room. His face was unreadable in the firelight. "I promise," she said. Thomas held on to her like she was the only solid thing in a world coming apart. Slowly his crying quieted to hiccups, then to shaky breaths, then to nothing as sleep finally claimed him. Elena kept holding him, afraid that if she let go, he'd wake and the terror would come flooding back. "You can put him down," Mary whispered. "He's out." "I know." But Elena didn't let go. Not yet. She sat there holding someone else's child and felt that crack in her chest widen a little more. Eventually she did lower him back onto his blankets, tucking them around him carefully. When she stood, her legs had gone stiff from kneeling. She made her way back to her own sleeping space and lay down, exhausted. Sleep came in pieces, broken by the sound of the storm and the creak of the house and the knowledge that they were trapped here until the weather decided to release them. She woke to find Caleb standing over her. The fire had burned low, and the room was freezing. "Something's wrong with the cow," he said quietly. "I can hear her from here. She's in distress." Elena sat up. "What do you mean you can hear her?" "The barn's not far. Sound carries in the wind." He was already pulling on his coat. "I have to check on her." "In this?" Elena looked toward the door where snow had piled so high it was pressed against the wood. "You'll never make it." "She's carrying. If something's wrong and I don't help, we lose her and the calf. That's half our livestock gone." "Then I'll come with you." "No." "Yes." Elena stood and reached for Caleb's spare coat. "You go out there alone in this and you could die. At least with two of us there's a chance." I said no. "And I don't work for you, remember? I'm just help, so I'm helping." They stared at each other. Wyatt's voice came from the darkness near the loft. "She's right, Pa. You go out there alone, you're not coming back." Caleb's jaw clenched. "Fine, but you do exactly what I say. No arguments." "No arguments." They bundled up in every layer they could find. Caleb tied a rope around his waist and the other end around Elena's. "We get separated in this, we die. You stay on the rope." Elena nodded. Opening the door took both of them pushing against the weight of snow. When it finally gave, the storm came rushing in like something that had been waiting. The wind was a physical force. The snow was so thick Elena couldn't see Caleb even though he was right in front of her. They pushed forward into the white chaos. Each step was a battle. The snow came up past Elena's knees in some places, past her waist in others. The cold was instant and complete, stabbing through every layer she wore. Caleb moved forward and Elena followed, one hand on the rope, the other holding the coat closed around her face. The barn should have been 30 feet from the house. It felt like 30 miles. Something loomed out of the white. The barn wall. Caleb felt along it until he found the door and hauled it open. They stumbled inside and he slammed it shut behind them. The barn was dark and cold, but at least the wind couldn't reach them here. Elena's lungs burned from breathing frozen air. Her face was numb. She couldn't feel her feet. "Over here," Caleb said. She followed his voice to a stall where the cow lay on her side in the straw. Even in the darkness, Elena could see something was wrong. The cow's breathing was labored. Her eyes rolled white with pain. "She's trying to calf, but something stuck," Caleb said. He lit a lantern with shaking hands, and the dim light showed what Elena had feared. The cow was in bad shape. "I need to help her, but I can't do it alone." "What do you need me to do?" "Hold the lantern. Keep her calm if you can, and don't pass out." "I've seen worse." "Have you?" Elena thought about the things she'd seen growing up in a house where her father butchered their own meat, and her mother delivered half the babies in their neighborhood. "Yes." For the next hour they worked. Caleb's hands inside the cow, trying to turn the calf, trying to guide it out while the mother made sounds that would haunt Elena's dreams for years. Elena held the lantern and talked to the cow in a low, steady voice. Words that didn't mean anything but the tone of which said, "We're trying, we're here, hold on." Blood and birth fluids soaked the straw. Caleb's arms were red to the elbows. Sweat ran down his face despite the cold, and his hands shook from effort and cold combined. "Almost," he said through gritted teeth. "Almost got it." The cow made a sound like she was dying. Then one final push, and the calf came sliding out in a rush of fluid and membrane. It lay still in the straw. "Is it alive?" Elena asked. Caleb grabbed a handful of straw and rubbed the calf's sides roughly. Nothing happened. He rubbed harder. Still nothing. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, damn you." He cleared the membrane from the calf's nose and mouth and rubbed again, more desperately this time. Elena watched and felt something heavy settle in her chest. They'd come all this way, fought through the storm, and the calf was going to die anyway. Then the calf coughed. Its sides heaved and it coughed again, clearing fluid from its lungs. The mother cow made a sound, turned her head, and started licking her baby. Caleb sat back in the bloody straw, his chest heaving. "We did it." "You did it," Elena said. "No, we." He looked at her, and something passed between them. Not friendship, not even gratitude, just recognition. Two people who'd fought death together and won. "Thank you." They stayed in the barn for another hour, making sure the calf was nursing, making sure the mother cow was stable. The storm continued to rage outside, but in the small circle of lamplight, things were quiet, almost peaceful. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Depends on what it is." "Why did you really send for me? The truth." Caleb was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Because I was drowning. You were right about that. I couldn't keep the ranch running and raise the kids and hold myself together. Something had to give. And I wasn't going to let it be my children. So you bought help." "I bought help." He looked at her. "I didn't expect you to be like this." "Like what?" "Strong, stubborn, someone who'd fight instead of run." He shook his head. "Most people would have left after that first night, after Wyatt, after seeing how bad things were. Most people have somewhere to go." "And you don't?" "No." Elena set down the lantern. "I've got nowhere and no one. This place might be falling apart, but it's the only place I've got, so I'm going to fight for it." Caleb studied her face in the lamplight. "You're not what I paid for." "I know." "You're more." The words hung in the cold air between them. Elena didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Finally, Caleb stood. "We should get back before the kids think we died out here." The trip back to the house was just as brutal as the trip out, but faster because they knew the way. When they pushed through the door, Mary screamed and Thomas started crying, and even Wyatt looked relieved. "We thought you were dead," Mary said, her voice shaking. "You were gone so long." "The cow needed help," Caleb said, peeling off his frozen coat. "She had her calf. Both are fine." Elena's hands were so cold she couldn't feel them. She stood by the fire trying to thaw while Mary and Wyatt fussed over their father, and Thomas clung to Elena's legs like he was afraid she'd disappear again. That night, they all slept closer to the fire than before. Elena woke once to find Caleb's coat draped over her blankets. She didn't know when he'd put it there, but it was warm and it smelled like leather and snow, and something else she couldn't name. The storm lasted 3 more days. They ate sparingly and moved as little as possible to conserve heat. Elena told stories to keep the children entertained. Mary taught her a card game using a deck so old and worn the suits were barely visible. Wyatt carved animals from scraps of wood, his hands moving with surprising skill. Caleb watched all of this from his position by the fire. He didn't participate, but he didn't retreat either. He was present in a way he hadn't been before. On the 4th day, the wind finally died. The silence when it stopped was so complete it felt wrong. Elena woke to sunlight streaming through gaps in the cloth over the windows, and for a moment couldn't remember where she was. Caleb was already up, digging out the door. When he got it open, the wall of snow beyond was nearly 5 feet high, but the sky above was blue. Painful, bright blue. "We need to check the fences," Caleb said. "Wyatt, get your coat." "I'll come too," Elena said. "You've done enough." I'll come too. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded. They dug a path from the door to the barn first. The snow was up to Elena's chest in some places. Her arms ached from shoveling, but she kept going. When they finally reached the barn, the cow and calf were both healthy. The chickens had survived. The horses were fine. Then they headed out to check the fence line, and that's when they found the first problem. A section near the eastern edge had collapsed under the weight of snow and ice. But that wasn't what made Caleb's face go dark. It was the tracks. Fresh tracks in the snow, boot prints, too many to count, and hoof prints from multiple horses. Someone was here, Wyatt said, during the storm. Not during, Caleb said, kneeling to examine the tracks. After. These are fresh, made this morning. Who would be riding out here after a storm like that? Caleb didn't answer. His jaw was tight, and his eyes scanned the tree line like he was looking for something he hoped not to find. Pa? Wyatt's voice had gone young and scared. Who was it? Probably just travelers using the fence line to navigate. But Caleb didn't sound convinced. Come on, let's get this section repaired before nightfall. They worked the rest of the day fixing the fence. Elena learned how to string wire and set posts. Her hands got torn up and her back complained, but she didn't stop. Wyatt worked beside her in silence, and once, when she nearly dropped a post, he caught it without being asked. Thanks, Elena said. You did good, Wyatt said quietly. With the cow. And with Thomas during the storm. I just did what needed doing. Yeah, so did Mama. Wyatt picked up his shovel. That's a compliment, in case you couldn't tell. Then he walked away, leaving Elena standing in the snow with something warm blooming in her chest despite the cold. That night they ate the last of the bread and most of the remaining beans. The supply wagon still hadn't come and wouldn't come until the roads cleared. They had maybe 3 days of food left if they were careful, maybe 2 if they weren't. Elena lay in her small room and did calculations in her head. They needed the wagon to come, or they needed Caleb to make the trip to town. But the roads were still bad, and leaving the ranch meant leaving the kids alone, and after what they'd found that morning, Caleb wouldn't do that, which meant they were going to go hungry. She was still awake when she heard footsteps outside her door. Then a quiet knock. Come in. Caleb opened the door. He looked exhausted, his face drawn and his eyes shadowed. Can't sleep? No? Me neither. He stood in the doorway like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to come in further. Those tracks this morning, they weren't travelers. Elena sat up. Who were they? Victor Crow's men. I'd recognize their horses anywhere. Who's Victor Crow? Caleb's expression went hard. Man who owns most of the land around here. Thinks he should own all of it. He's been trying to buy me out for 2 years. When I wouldn't sell, he started making things difficult. How difficult? Fence lines cut, supplies disappearing, livestock going missing. Caleb rubbed his face. Nothing I could prove. Nothing I could take to the law. Just enough to make it clear he wants me gone. And now he's sending men during blizzards? He's seeing how vulnerable we are. Seeing if the storm broke us. Caleb looked at her. He doesn't know about you. That might work in our favor. How? He thinks it's just me and 3 kids. He doesn't know I've got help. Someone who can handle herself. Caleb's jaw tightened. But that also means you're in danger now. Just being here. If Crow decides to make a real move, it won't be safe. I'm not leaving. Elena, I'm not leaving, she said again, harder this time. I told you, I've got nowhere to go. And even if I did, I'm not running from some land-grabbing bastard who thinks fear gives him power. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. You remind me of her, my wife. She was stubborn like you, fearless when she shouldn't have been. I'm plenty scared. I'm just good at not showing it. That's the same thing. No, it's not. Elena stood and walked to the window. The moon was bright on the snow outside. Being fearless means you don't feel the fear. Being brave means you feel it and do it anyway. I'm not fearless. I'm terrified. But I'm here and I'm staying. Caleb was quiet. Then he said, when the road's clear, I need to go to town, get supplies. Maybe see if I can find out what Crow's planning. We'll be fine here. Will you? He looked toward the door like he could see through it to where his children slept. Can you handle them if something happens while I'm gone? Yes. You sound sure. I am. Elena turned to face him. I survived my parents dying. I survived my uncle selling me like livestock. I can survive 3 kids and whatever Victor Crow thinks he can throw at us. Caleb smiled. It was small, and it didn't last long, but it was the first real smile Elena had seen from him. You're something else. You know that? So I've been told. He left without another word, closing the door quietly behind him. Elena went back to bed, but sleep still wouldn't come. She lay there thinking about boot prints in the snow and men who used fear as a weapon and a life that was turning out to be far more complicated than she'd expected when she climbed into that wagon weeks ago. But she'd meant what she said. She wasn't leaving. And if Victor Crow wanted this ranch, he was going to have to go through her to get it. The roads cleared enough for travel by the end of the week. Caleb left before sunrise with the wagon and a rifle across his lap. His face set in the same hard lines Elena had come to recognize as worry trying to look like determination. He'd given her instructions that felt more like warnings. Keep the doors locked. Don't let the children outside alone. If anyone comes asking questions, don't answer them. How long will you be gone? Elena had asked as he climbed onto the wagon seat. 2 days. 3 if the roads are worse than they look. He'd paused, the reins already in his hands. If I'm not back in 4 days, take the kids and head south. Don't wait for me. I'm not leaving. Elena. I'm not leaving, she'd said again. You come back or you don't. But we'll be here either way. He'd looked at her with something complicated in his eyes, then snapped the reins and disappeared into the gray morning light. Now it was mid-afternoon, and Elena stood at the kitchen window watching the tree line. The children were restless without their father. Thomas kept asking when Pa was coming home. Mary had gone quiet in that way she had when she was trying to be brave and failing. Wyatt had taken to pacing the loft like a caged animal, his footsteps a constant reminder of tension that had nowhere to go. Elena was making soup from the supplies Caleb had left when she heard the horses. Not one horse, several. The sound of hooves on frozen ground carried across the valley like a warning. Elena set down her spoon and moved to the window. Through the wavy glass, she could see them coming up the road. 4 riders on dark horses, moving slow and deliberate. Mary, Elena said quietly, take Thomas to your room. Stay there until I say otherwise. What's wrong? Do it now. Something in her voice made Mary move. She grabbed Thomas's hand and pulled him toward the bedroom. Thomas started to protest, but Mary clamped a hand over his mouth and dragged him along. Wyatt, Elena called up to the loft. Get down here. Wyatt appeared at the top of the ladder. What's happening? Riders, 4 of them. I need you to stay inside and keep quiet. Like hell! If someone's coming here, you're going to do exactly what I say. Elena turned to face him. I know you want to fight. I know you think you need to protect your family, but right now the best thing you can do is keep your brother and sister safe. Can you do that? Wyatt's jaw clenched. He wanted to argue. Elena could see it in every line of his body, but after a moment he nodded and climbed back up to the loft, where he'd have a view of the main room through the floorboards. Elena checked the rifle Caleb kept above the door. It was loaded. She left it there where she could reach it, but not where it would be the first thing the riders saw. Then she smoothed her dress, took a breath, and waited. The knock came hard and demanding. 3 solid hits that rattled the door in its frame. Elena counted to 5, then opened it. The man on the porch was tall and broad, with a face that had probably been handsome 20 years ago, before liquor and meanness had carved new lines into it. He wore a heavy coat and expensive boots, and his eyes swept over Elena with the kind of assessment that made her skin crawl. Help you? Elena asked. She kept her voice level, neither friendly nor hostile. Looking for Caleb Mercer. He's not here. Where is he? Don't see how that's your business. The man smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. My name's Frank Dalton. I work for Victor Crow. He sent me to have a conversation with Mercer about his property. Mr. Mercer isn't here to have conversations. You'll have to come back another time. When's he coming back? Don't know. You his wife? No. Then who the hell are you? Elena met his eyes and didn't blink. Someone who's telling you to get off this porch and come back when the owner's home. Dalton's smile got wider and meaner. That's real brave. Woman alone telling 4 men to leave. You got a gun in there? Maybe. You know how to use it? Why don't you try finding out? For a moment they just looked at each other. Elena's heart was hammering, but she kept her face calm. Behind Dalton, she could see the other three riders. One of them had his hand on his pistol. Another was looking at the barn like he was calculating what was inside. "Mr. Crow's a patient man," Dalton said finally. "But his patience has limits. He's made Mercer a fair offer for this land, more than fair, and he expects an answer. I'm sure Mr. Mercer will give him one when he's ready. See, that's the problem. We've been waiting on him to be ready for 2 years now, starting to think he's never going to be ready." Dalton leaned against the door frame. "This land's worth more to Mr. Crow than it is to a widow-maker like Mercer. Man can barely keep his family fed, can barely keep his fences standing. Smart thing would be to take the money and move somewhere easier. That's for Mr. Mercer to decide." "Is it?" Dalton looked past her into the house. "Where's his kids?" "None of your concern. Everything on this property is my concern. Mr. Crow owns everything that borders this ranch, makes him a neighbor, and neighbors look out for each other." His eyes came back to Elena. "Make sure nothing bad happens to vulnerable families." The threat wasn't even subtle. Elena felt anger rise in her chest, but she kept it off her face. "I'll tell Mr. Mercer you stopped by. You do that." Dalton pushed off the doorframe. "And you tell him Mr. Crow's done waiting. He's got 1 week to accept the offer. After that, well, accidents happen out here in the wilderness. Fences fall, livestock wander off, houses catch fire in the middle of the night. That a threat? That's a fact. This is hard country for people who don't have protection. We'll manage. Will you?" Dalton's eyes traveled over her again, slow and deliberate. "Pretty thing like, you shouldn't be stuck out here playing house with another woman's kids. You got questions about what happened to the last Mrs. Mercer, you should ask around town. Ask what happens to people who don't take good advice." Ice flooded Elena's veins. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means accidents happen." Dalton tipped his hat. 1 week. You make sure Mercer gets that message." He turned and walked back to his horse. The 4 riders sat there for another moment, making sure Elena felt the weight of their presence, then turned and rode away at a leisurely pace that said they had all the time in the world. Elena stood on the porch watching until they disappeared over the ridge. Only then did she close the door and lock it. Her hands were shaking. "Are they gone?" Mary's voice came from the hallway. "They're gone." Mary emerged with Thomas clinging to her skirts. "Who were they?" "Men who work for someone named Victor Crow. They wanted to talk to your father." "What did they want?" Elena looked at Mary's frightened face and Thomas's wide eyes and decided the truth was better than lies they'd see through anyway. "They want your father to sell the ranch, and they're not asking nicely." Wyatt climbed down from the loft. His face was pale, but his hands were steady. "What did that man mean about Mama?" "I don't know. He said accidents happen. He said we should ask what happened to her." Wyatt's voice was rising. "What did he mean?" "Wyatt, what did he mean?" Came out as a shout. Elena grabbed his shoulders. "I don't know, but we're going to find out. When your father gets back, we're going to ask him, together, all right?" Wyatt jerked away from her. "She got sick. That's what Pa said. She got sick, and the doctor couldn't save her. Then that's probably what happened." "But you don't know for sure." "No, I don't." Elena looked at all 3 children standing in the main room looking scared and young and lost. "But I know your father wouldn't lie about something like that. And I know standing here imagining the worst isn't going to help anyone." "So what do we do?" Mary asked. "We wait for your father to come home, and in the meantime we stay alert. Nobody goes outside alone. Nobody opens the door for strangers. We stick together. Understand?" 3 heads nodded. The rest of the day crawled by. Elena kept herself busy cooking and cleaning and trying not to look out the window every 5 minutes. She taught Mary how to make biscuits from scratch. She let Thomas help her mend a shirt even though his stitches were crooked and useless. She watched Wyatt carve another wooden animal and pretended not to notice when he set it on the mantel next to the ones he'd made before. Night came early and dark. Elena checked the doors twice and made sure the rifle was loaded and within reach. They ate dinner in near silence, everyone listening for sounds that didn't come. "Tell us a story," Thomas said as Elena tucked him into bed. "What kind of story?" "A happy one." Elena thought for a moment. "My mother used to tell me about the house she grew up in. It had a garden in the back where she grew tomatoes and peppers and herbs. Every summer, the whole neighborhood would smell like basil. She said when she was little, she thought that's what summer was supposed to smell like everywhere. Did you have a garden? We tried, but we lived in town and the soil wasn't very good. My mother kept trying anyway. She said hope was more important than good soil. Thomas considered this. I don't remember our garden. Mama had one, but it's all dead now. We could plant a new one in the spring, Elena heard herself say. If you want. Would you show me how? I would. Thomas smiled and closed his eyes. Within minutes, he was asleep. Elena stood and found Mary watching from her bed. You meant that? Mary asked quietly. About the garden? Yes. You think you'll still be here in the spring? Elena sat on the edge of Mary's bed. I think I'm going to do everything I can to make sure all of us are here in the spring. Your whole family, together. Even if those men come back? Especially if those men come back. Mary was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm glad Pa brought you here. I didn't think I would be, but I am. Something warm and painful bloomed in Elena's chest. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. She left the children and went to her own room, but sleep felt impossible. Every sound made her tense. Every creak of the house settling made her reach for the knife she'd started keeping under her pillow. Somewhere past midnight, she finally drifted off into restless dreams of riders and fire, and voices telling her to run while she still could. She woke to Wyatt shaking her shoulder. The room was still dark. Someone's outside, he whispered. Elena was on her feet instantly, the knife in her hand. Where? Near the barn. I heard something from the loft. They moved through the dark house together. Elena grabbed the rifle from above the door and checked that it was loaded. Through the window, she could see a faint glow near the barn. Not firelight. Something else. A lantern, maybe. Stay with Mary and Thomas, Elena said. I'm coming with you. Wyatt, I'm coming with you. His voice was hard. That's my father's barn. My family's property. I'm not hiding while someone messes with it. Elena looked at him and saw not a boy, but someone trying desperately to be a man in a world that had forced him to grow up too fast. Fine, but you stay behind me and you do what I say. Agreed? Agreed. They pulled on coats and boots and slipped out the back door into the freezing night. The sky was clear, and the stars were so bright they cast shadows on the snow. Elena moved toward the barn with the rifle ready, Wyatt following close behind. The glow was coming from inside the barn. Someone had opened the door and was moving around with a light source. Elena could hear voices, low and male, and definitely not Caleb. She stopped at the corner of the barn and peered around. 2 men, one holding a lantern, the other doing something near the hay storage. It took Elena a moment to realize what she was seeing. Then the smell hit her. Kerosene. They were going to burn the barn. Rage flooded through her, hot and immediate. She stepped around the corner with the rifle raised. Step away from the hay. Both men froze. The one with the lantern turned, and his hand went to his pistol. I wouldn't, Elena said. This rifle's already pointed at you. Yours is still in its holster. Do the math. The man's hand stopped moving. You're making a mistake, lady. The only mistake here is you thinking you could burn someone's property in the middle of the night and not face consequences. Elena took a step closer. Drop the lantern, slowly. Mr. Crow's not going to like this. I don't give a damn what Mr. Crow likes. Drop it. The man set the lantern down. The other one, the one who'd been pouring kerosene, straightened up with his hands visible. Now back up, toward your horses. They moved slowly, their eyes never leaving the rifle. Elena followed them out of the barn, Wyatt behind her, until they reached the 2 horses tied to the fence. Get on and ride, Elena said. And you tell Victor Crow that if he wants this ranch, he's going to have to do better than sending cowards to burn barns in the dark. You're going to regret this. Maybe, but you're going to regret it faster if you're still standing here in 5 seconds. 1. They scrambled onto their horses. Elena didn't get to 2 before they were riding away, disappearing into the darkness at a gallop. She stood there with the rifle still raised until the sound of hooves faded completely. Only then did she lower it. Her hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped it. That was incredible, Wyatt said. His voice was full of awe and fear mixed together. That was stupid, Elena said. I should have just shot them. You would have killed them? No, but I would have aimed for their legs. Make it so they couldn't run back to Crow so fast. She turned back to the barn. Help me clean up this kerosene before it soaks in too deep. They spent the next hour spreading fresh straw over the kerosene-soaked areas and airing out the barn. The whole time Elena's mind was racing. Crow had escalated from threats to action. The riders that afternoon had been a test. When Caleb wasn't home, they'd come back to do real damage, which meant they'd come back again. And next time they might not be so easy to scare off. When the barn was as clean as they could make it, Elena and Wyatt went back to the house. The sky was starting to lighten in the east. Dawn was maybe an hour away. Mary was waiting in the kitchen with Thomas. She took one look at Elena's face and said, "What happened?" "Someone tried to burn the barn. We stopped them." Mary's face went pale. "Are they coming back?" "Probably." "What do we do?" Elena set the rifle back above the door. "We get ready. And when your father comes home, we figure out how to end this before someone gets hurt." "Or worse," Wyatt said quietly. Elena looked at him. "Or worse." They made breakfast, but nobody had much appetite. Elena forced herself to eat anyway, knowing she'd need the energy for whatever came next. The children picked at their food and kept glancing toward the windows like they expected to see riders approaching at any moment. The morning stretched on. Elena tried to keep everyone busy with chores, but the tension in the house was thick enough to cut. Every sound made them all jump. Every shadow was a threat. It was near noon when they heard the wagon. Elena ran to the window and felt relief flood through her when she saw Caleb driving the team up the road. He was alone, and he looked exhausted, but he was alive and whole. The children spilled out of the house before Elena could stop them, running to meet their father. Caleb climbed down from the wagon and caught Thomas as the boy launched himself at his legs. Mary wrapped her arms around his waist, and even Wyatt stood close, his face carefully neutral, but his relief visible. Elena stayed on the porch and watched. This was their moment. Their family. She was just the help. But then Caleb looked over his children's heads and met her eyes, and something passed between them that felt important in ways Elena didn't have words for. He herded the kids inside and started unloading supplies. Flour, beans, dried meat, coffee, sugar. More than they'd had in months. Elena helped carry things in while the children told their father about the men who'd come, about the threats, about the attempted arson. Caleb's face got darker with every word. When they finished, he set down the sack he was carrying and turned to Elena. "Tell me exactly what happened. Everything." So she did. The riders in the afternoon, the threats about his wife, the men in the barn, her running them off with the rifle. When she finished, Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "You pointed a gun at Crow's men." "Yes. You could have been killed. They could have burned your barn." "It's just a building, Elena." "No, it's not." Elena met his eyes. "It's your livelihood, your animals, your ability to survive the winter, and I wasn't going to stand by and let them take it." Caleb looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're either very brave or very stupid." "Probably both." He almost smiled. Then he turned to the children. "Pack some things. Clothes, blankets, anything you can't live without. Do it fast." "Why?" Mary asked. "Because we're leaving tonight." "We can't leave," Wyatt said. "This is our home. This is a death trap. Crow's not playing games anymore. He wants us gone and he's willing to kill to make it happen." Elena stepped forward. "Running won't solve anything. He'll just take the land and you'll have nothing. We'll be alive. For how long? Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? This ranch is all you have." "I'll find something else." "Where? How?" Elena's voice rose. "You have 3 children and winter's not over. You run now and you'll be dead before spring. If not from Crow's men, then from cold or hunger or just bad luck. So what do you suggest? We stay here and wait for them to burn us out? Wait for them to kill us in our sleep? No. We fight." Caleb stared at her. "Fight. 4 people against Victor Crow and however many men he's got." 3 people, Elena corrected. "The children stay safe, but yes, we fight." "That's insane." "So is running." Elena moved closer to him. "You said your wife died in an accident, but those men today, they said things that made it sound like maybe it wasn't an accident. Was it?" Caleb's face went white. The children had gone very still. Was it? Elena asked again. I don't know. The words came out rough. The doctor said it was fever. But she was fine one day and dead 3 days later. And the day before she got sick, 2 of Crow's men had been here making threats. I've thought about it every day since. Whether they did something, whether I could have stopped it. Mary made a small sound. Thomas started crying. Wyatt's hands had balled into fists. Then you know running won't work, Elena said quietly. Because Crow doesn't just want your land. He wants you gone. And if he'll kill your wife to get it, he'll follow you wherever you go and finish the job. Caleb sank into a chair and put his head in his hands. I can't protect them. I'm one man. I'm not enough. You're not one man. Elena knelt in front of him. You're not alone anymore. He looked up at her. What are you talking about? I know someone. Someone who owes me a favor. A big one. Elena took a breath. And I'm calling it in. Who? His name is Silas Boone. He used to work with my mother's family before they came north. He's not a good man, but he's a dangerous one. And if anyone can help us hold this ranch, it's him. Why would he help us? Because my mother saved his life once. And he swore on her grave that if I ever needed anything, I just had to ask. Elena stood. I'm asking. Caleb studied her face. You've been saving this favor. Why use it now? Because this is worth it. Elena looked around the house, at the children watching with huge, frightened eyes, at the home that was shabby and broken but was still a home. Because sometimes you have to fight for the things that matter. What if he can't come? What if he's too far away? Then we fight anyway, just the 2 of us. Elena held out her hand. What do you say? Caleb looked at her hand, at her face, at his children. Then he reached out and took it. We fight, he said. Elena spent the afternoon writing a letter. It took 3 tries to get the words right. She explained the situation, the danger, the need. She reminded Silas of his promise to her mother. She told him where to find them. Then she paid the man who delivered mail between settlements $20 she'd been saving since before her parents died to make sure the letter got delivered fast. How long? Caleb asked as they watched the messenger ride away. If he gets the letter today and leaves immediately, 4 days. Maybe 5. And if Crow comes before then? We hold the line. That night they prepared. Caleb showed Elena how to shoot the rifle properly, correcting her stance and her aim. Wyatt helped them inventory ammunition. They had 2 rifles, 1 pistol, and maybe 100 rounds between them. Not much if it came to a real fight. They reinforced the doors and shuttered the windows. They filled buckets with water in case of fire. They made a plan for where the children would hide if shooting started. Mary watched all of this with a face that tried to be brave, and Thomas clung to Elena whenever she was within reach. She let him. If comfort was what he needed, she'd give it. 3 days passed with no sign of Crow's men. The waiting was worse than action. Everyone was tense and jumpy. Caleb barely slept. Elena caught him standing watch by the window more nights than not. On the 4th day, riders appeared on the ridge at dawn. Not 4 this time, not even 10, 20 men, maybe more. They sat on their horses looking down at the ranch like wolves deciding how to take down prey. Caleb saw them first. Get the children, he said. His voice was flat, empty. It's over. No, it's not. Elena grabbed the rifle. Get them in the cellar like we planned. Bar the door. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Elena, do it. She didn't wait to see if he listened. She ran outside onto the porch with the rifle raised and watched the riders watching her. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats from the south, coming fast. 6 riders crested the far ridge. Even from a distance, Elena recognized the man in front. Tall and rail-thin with long hair gone gray and eyes that could cut through stone. Silas Boone had come, and he'd brought help. The riders from the south swept down into the valley like a storm. Crow's men on the north ridge shifted uneasily. They'd come expecting to terrorize a family. They hadn't expected opposition. Silas rode right up to the porch and dismounted. Up close, he looked older than Elena remembered, but no less dangerous. He had a rifle across his back and pistols on both hips, and a knife strapped to his thigh. "Elena Marquez," he said. His voice was rough from years of tobacco and whiskey. When I got your letter, I thought you were dead. Not yet. He looked at the riders on the ridge. Those the ones giving you trouble? Those are them. How many? At least 20, probably more coming. Silas smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. Good. Been too long since I had a proper fight. He turned to his men. What do you say, boys? Feel like teaching some land-grabbing bastards about hospitality? The men grinned. They were hard-looking, every one of them. Men who'd lived rough and fought rougher. Exactly what Elena had hoped for. Caleb emerged from the house with the children behind him. He looked at Silas and his men, and his face was carefully blank. You came. Promised Elena's mother I would. Don't break promises to dead women. Silas looked Caleb up and down. You the man of the house? I am. Good, because we're about to turn your ranch into a battlefield, and I need to know you've got the stomach for it. Caleb's jaw tightened. They killed my wife. I've got the stomach. Silas nodded slowly. Then let's get to work. They had maybe 3 hours before Crow's men decided to make their move. Silas used every minute. He walked the property with Caleb and Elena, his eyes scanning the terrain like he was reading a map only he could see. He pointed to the ridge where Crow's riders sat watching. They've got high ground. That's their advantage. But it also means they have to come down to get to you, and that slope's steeper than it looks. What are you thinking? Caleb asked. I'm thinking we make them regret coming down. Silas stopped near the barn and kicked at the snow. Ground's frozen solid. We can't dig trenches, but we can build barriers, stack hay bales, overturn the wagon, anything that'll give us cover when the shooting starts. You really think they're going to attack? Elena asked. In broad daylight? Silas looked at her with something that might have been pity. Girl, they've got 20 men up there, and they know there's just a family down here. They think this is going to be easy. That's why we're going to make damn sure it's not. One of Silas's men, a barrel-chested man with a scar running from his eye to his jaw, spat into the snow. We could ride up there right now, take the fight to them before they're ready. No, Silas said. We defend. Let them come to us. Let them make mistakes. He turned to Caleb. You got any dynamite? Blasting powder? Anything that goes boom? Got some dynamite in the shed, use it for clearing stumps. How much? 6 sticks. Maybe 7? Silas smiled that dangerous smile again. That'll do. Get it. And get me some tin cans and whatever nails or scrap metal you got lying around. While Caleb went to gather supplies, Silas put his men to work. They moved with efficiency that came from years of doing exactly this kind of thing. Elena watched them stack hay bales into defensive positions, overturn the empty wagon to create a barrier near the house, scatter old farming equipment in the snow to trip horses. You ever been in a fight like this? Silas asked her. No. You scared? Terrified. Good. Fear keeps you alive. It's the ones who aren't scared that get killed first. He handed her a pistol. You know how to use this? I've shot rifles. This is different, lighter, faster, less range, but you don't need range in close fighting. He showed her how to check the cylinder, how to aim, how to breathe through the recoil. You see a man coming at you, you point and you shoot. Don't think. Don't hesitate. Just shoot. Elena took the pistol. It was heavier than she expected, the metal cold even through her gloves. I've never killed anyone. You might today. You all right with that? She thought about Caleb's wife, about the threats against the children, about men who thought they could take whatever they wanted through fear and violence. Yes. Then you'll do fine. Caleb returned with the dynamite and a box of rusty nails. Silas took them and called over 2 of his men. They worked quickly, packing the dynamite into tin cans along with handfuls of nails and wrapping the whole thing with wire. Crude bombs that would spray shrapnel when they exploded. Where do you want them? One of the men asked. Silas pointed to spots along the approach from the ridge. They're there and there. Bury them shallow in the snow. Run fuses back behind cover. When they charge, we light them up and turn that field into a killing ground. Elena watched them work and felt sick. This wasn't defense. This was war. And she'd brought it here by calling Silas. Second thoughts? Silas asked, reading her face. I'm wondering if there was another way. There wasn't. Men like Crow don't understand negotiation. They understand power. Right now we're showing them we've got enough power to make this cost them. He looked at the riders on the ridge. Doesn't mean they won't attack, but it might make them think twice. By midday, they were as ready as they were going to be. The ranch looked like a fortress. Hay bales formed a semicircle around the house. The overturned wagon blocked the main approach. The bombs were buried and the fuses laid. Silas's men had taken positions with clear fields of fire. "Where do you want me?" Elena asked. Silas considered. "You should be inside with the children." "No." "Elena, I called you here. I asked for this fight. I'm not hiding while other people bleed for it." Silas looked at Caleb. "She always this stubborn?" "You have no idea," Caleb said. There was something in his voice that hadn't been there before. Not quite fondness, but close to it. "Fine," Silas said. "You're with me behind the wagon. When the shooting starts, you keep your head down and only shoot when you've got a clear target. Understand?" "I understand." The children were in the cellar. Elena had gone down to see them before taking her position. Mary had been trying to be brave, but her hands shook when she hugged Elena. Thomas had cried and asked her to stay. Wyatt had just looked at her with eyes too old for his face and said, "Don't die." "I'll try not to," Elena had told him. Now she crouched behind the wagon with Silas on one side and one of his men on the other. Caleb was behind hay bales to the left with two more of Silas's crew. The rest were scattered in defensive positions around the property. The riders on the ridge had grown restless. They'd been sitting up there for hours watching the ranch transform into something they hadn't expected. Elena could almost hear them arguing about what to do. "They're going to send someone down to talk first," Silas said. "Try to intimidate you into surrendering. When that doesn't work, they'll attack." "How do you know?" "Because it's what I do." He checked his rifle. "When they send their man down, I'll do the talking. You just look dangerous." "I don't know how to look dangerous." "You pointed a gun at two of them the other night. I'd say you've got it figured out." 20 minutes later, a single rider detached from the group on the ridge and started down the slope. He rode slowly, his hands visible, but Elena could see the pistol on his hip. It was Frank Dalton, the same man who'd come before. He rode to within 30 feet of the wagon and stopped. His eyes went wide when he saw the fortifications, the armed men, the transformed ranch. "The hell is this?" he called out. Silas stood. "This is what happens when you pick on the wrong people." Dalton's face darkened. "Who are you?" "Name's Silas Boone. Maybe you've heard of me." Even from 30 feet away, Elena could see Dalton's face go pale. "You're supposed to be dead." "Heard that rumor myself. Turns out it was exaggerated." Silas rested his rifle on the wagon. "Now why don't you ride back up that ridge and tell Victor Crow he picked the wrong ranch to steal? This is private business between Crow and Mercer." "It was. Now it's not. Now it's business between Crow and me. And I don't take kindly to men who burn barns and make widows." "We didn't." "Don't lie to me, boy. I can smell the guilt on you from here." Silas's voice went cold. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to ride back up there and tell Crow he's got one chance to pack up and leave. If he's smart, he'll take it. If he's stupid, well, won't be the first stupid man I've put in the ground." Dalton's hand moved toward his pistol. Every gun in the yard swung to point at him. "I wouldn't," Silas said conversationally. "You might get one shot off before 6 rifles turn you into paste. Math doesn't work in your favor." Dalton's hand stopped. He looked at Elena behind the wagon and his eyes narrowed. "You brought them here. You called in guns." "I called in friends," Elena said. "There's a difference. Crow's not going to forget this." "Good. I'm counting on that." Dalton jerked his horse around and rode back up the ridge. They watched him go, watched him join the cluster of riders at the top, watched as he gestured and pointed and argued. "Get ready," Silas said quietly. "He just told them we're dug in and armed. Now they have to decide if they want to pay the price." "What do you think they'll do?" "I think Crow's pride won't let him back down. Not in front of his men. Not after coming all this way." Silas looked at her. "I think they're going to attack, and I think a lot of people are going to die." Elena's mouth was dry. "What if we're wrong? What if there was a way to end this without—" "There's not. I've seen men like Crow 100 times. They don't stop until someone makes them stop. Today we're making him stop." The riders on the ridge milled around for another 10 minutes. Then they spread out into a line. 20 men on horseback, rifles in hand, facing down toward the ranch. "Here we go," Silas said. He raised his voice. "Hold your fire until I give the word. Let them get close. Make every shot count." Elena's hands were shaking. She gripped the pistol tighter, trying to stop the tremor. Beside her, Silas was calm as stone, his rifle steady, his breathing even. The riders started down the slope. They came slowly at first, picking their way through the snow and rocks. Then they picked up speed. By the time they hit the flat ground at the bottom of the ridge, they were at a full gallop, 20 horses thundering toward the ranch with riders shooting and shouting. "Steady!" Silas called out. "Steady!" The horses crossed into the field where the bombs were buried. Elena could see the fuses waiting to be lit. "Now!" Silas shouted. 3 of his men touched fire to the fuses. The flames raced along the lines and disappeared into the snow. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world exploded. The first bomb went off with a sound like thunder, snow and dirt and metal spraying in all directions. A horse screamed and went down, throwing its rider. The second bomb followed, then the third, each explosion tearing holes in the charging line. "Fire!" Silas yelled. Rifles cracked from all around the ranch. Elena raised her pistol, but her hands were shaking too badly to aim. A rider was coming straight at the wagon, his face twisted in rage, his rifle pointing at her. She fired. The recoil nearly knocked the pistol from her hand. The shot went wide. The rider kept coming. She fired again. This time she saw blood blossom on his shoulder. He dropped his rifle and grabbed the wound but stayed in the saddle. The third shot took him in the chest and he fell backward, hitting the snow and not moving. Elena stared at what she'd done. She'd killed a man. Actually killed him. The pistol felt like it weighed 100 pounds. "Elena!" Silas grabbed her shoulder. "Stay focused. We're not done." The riders had broken into 2 groups. One was retreating back toward the ridge, dragging wounded with them. The other was circling around toward the barn, trying to flank the defenders. "Caleb!" Silas shouted. "They're going for the barn!" Caleb and his 2 companions shifted position, firing at the riders trying to circle around. One of Silas's men went down with blood spreading across his leg. He kept shooting anyway, his face set in grim determination. The battle turned into chaos. Smoke from gunfire hung in the air. Horses screamed. Men shouted orders that couldn't be heard over the shooting. Elena fired whenever she saw a target, not thinking, just doing what Silas had told her. Point and shoot. Point and shoot. A rider broke through the defensive line and charged straight at the house. Caleb stepped out from behind the hay bales and shot the horse. The animal went down hard, and the rider flew over its head, landing in the snow. He tried to get up, but Caleb was already there, his rifle pointed at the man's face. "Stay down," Caleb said. The man stayed down. The attack lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. Finally, the remaining riders broke and retreated, racing back up the ridge with the defenders' bullets chasing them. Silence fell over the ranch. Elena's ears were ringing. Her hands were still shaking. She looked down and saw blood on her dress and couldn't remember if it was hers or someone else's. "Everyone all right?" Silas called out. A chorus of responses came back. 2 of Silas's men were wounded, but neither seriously. Caleb was unharmed. The buildings were intact. In the field between the ranch and the ridge, 4 bodies lay in the snow. 4 men who'd come to kill and been killed instead. 3 more wounded had been dragged away by the retreating riders. "Check the perimeter," Silas ordered. "They might try again." But the riders on the ridge were in disarray. Even from a distance, Elena could see the confusion, the fear. They'd expected an easy fight and gotten a bloodbath. "They won't attack again today," Silas said. "Lost too many. But they'll regroup, come back with more men and a better plan." "So this was for nothing?" Elena asked. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. "This was everything. We showed them we can fight. We showed them taking this ranch will cost them." Silas reloaded his rifle. "Now we show them it'll cost them even more." Caleb came over, his face grim. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we don't wait for them to attack again. We take the fight to them." "That's suicide." "Is it?" Silas pointed to the ridge. "They're in chaos. They've got wounded to tend to and fear spreading through their ranks. Right now, they're vulnerable. We hit them tonight, hit them hard, we might end this for good. Or we might all die." "True." Silas looked at him. "But you know Crow. You know he won't stop. He'll bring more men, more guns, more fire. Eventually he'll overwhelm us, unless we cut the head off the snake. Elena stepped forward. You're talking about killing Victor Crow. I'm talking about ending the threat, however that needs to happen. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Where would we find him? I know where Crow camps when he's working this area. Place about 3 miles north in the mountains. Hidden canyon with good water. Silas's eyes gleamed. We go tonight. Small group, fast and quiet. Get in, deal with Crow, get out. Who goes? Me. 2 of my best men. And you? Silas looked at Elena. And her if she's willing. No, Caleb said immediately. She's not a soldier. Neither are you. But she's earned the right to be there. Silas turned to Elena. It's your choice. You can stay here, guard the children, let the men handle it. Or you can come with us and finish what you started. Elena looked at the bodies in the snow, at the blood on her hands, at Caleb's worried face and Silas's expectant one. She thought about the children in the cellar and the threats that wouldn't stop and the fact that running had never been an option. I'm coming, she said. Elena say, Caleb started. I'm coming, she said again, harder. This is my fight too. I'm not sitting it out. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Silas's wounded men were tended to and given positions guarding the ranch. The man Caleb had captured was tied up in the barn after revealing, under Silas's questioning, that Crow was indeed camped in the northern canyon with about 12 men. 12, Caleb said. We're taking 5 people against 12. We're taking surprise against overconfidence, Silas corrected. They think they're safe up there. They won't be expecting us. Elena went down to the cellar to check on the children. They'd heard the shooting and were huddled together in the darkness, frightened but unhurt. Is it over? Mary asked. Not yet, but soon. Elena knelt down and pulled all 3 of them into a hug. I need you to be brave a little while longer. Can you do that? 3 heads nodded against her. I'm scared, Thomas whispered. Me too, Elena said. But we're going to end this tonight, and then we'll be safe. Promise? Elena thought about making promises she might not be able to keep, but looking at Thomas's tear-stained face, she couldn't bring herself to offer anything less than certainty. I promise. Wyatt pulled away from the hug and looked at her. You're going with them. To fight. Yes. You could die. I could. But I could die hiding too. At least this way I'm fighting for something that matters. Wyatt's jaw set in that way that reminded her so much of his father. Then kill them. Kill them for what they did to Mama. The hatred in his voice should have shocked her. Instead, Elena just nodded. If it comes to that, I will. They left after dark. 5 riders on quiet horses, moving through the mountain passes with only starlight to guide them. Silas led, followed by his 2 men, the barrel-chested one called Dutch and a lean, quiet man named Cole. Caleb rode beside Elena, his face unreadable in the darkness. They didn't speak. Couldn't risk it. Sound carried in the mountains, and if Crow had scouts out, a single word could give them away. The canyon was exactly where Silas said it would be. A narrow cut in the rock with a stream running through it, and enough shelter from the wind to make camping comfortable. They could see the glow of fires from above, hear voices and laughter drifting up. Crow's men thought they were safe. Silas led them to a spot overlooking the camp, and they dismounted, tying the horses where they wouldn't be seen. From their vantage point, Elena could count 12 men around the fires. And there, in the center, sitting in a folding chair like he was holding court, was a man who could only be Victor Crow. He was older than Elena expected, mid-50s with gray hair and a thick beard. He wore expensive clothes and held a glass of what looked like whiskey. Even from a distance, she could see the arrogance in the way he sat, the way he gestured while talking, the absolute certainty that he was untouchable. That's him, Caleb breathed. His hand was white-knuckled on his rifle. Silas put a hand on his arm. Easy. We do this smart. Dutch and Cole, you circle around to the far side. When you hear my shot, you open fire. Drive them toward the rocks where we'll have them pinned. What about Crow? Elena asked. Crow's mine. Silas checked his rifle. The rest of you just keep his men busy. They split up. Dutch and Cole disappeared into the darkness like ghosts. Silas, Caleb, and Elena worked their way down closer to the camp, moving from rock to rock, staying in the shadows. Elena's heart was hammering, Every small sound felt deafening. Every moment she expected someone to shout an alarm. But Crow's men were relaxed, complacent. They'd won before and expected to win again. They didn't see death creeping toward them in the dark. Silas found a position behind a boulder with a clear shot at Crow. He gestured for Caleb and Elena to spread out to either side. Elena wedged herself between two rocks and raised her pistol, knowing it was useless at this range but needing something to hold on to. Silas aimed. His finger touched the trigger. A twig snapped behind them. "Don't move." Elena's blood went cold. She turned slowly and saw Frank Dalton standing 10 feet away with a rifle pointed at them. His shoulder was bandaged where Elena had shot him that afternoon. "Thought you could sneak up on us," Dalton said. "Thought we wouldn't post guard, stupid." In the camp below, men were standing, reaching for weapons, looking up toward the rocks. "Well," Silas said calmly, "this complicates things." Dalton smiled. "Throw down your weapons. Now." Silas glanced at Caleb, then at Elena. Something passed between them. An understanding. Then Silas threw himself sideways and fired. The shot took Dalton in the throat. He went down gurgling and the rifle fell from his hands. But the damage was done. The entire camp was alert now, men scrambling for guns and cover. "So much for surprise," Silas muttered. "Plan's the same, just messier. Go!" Gunfire erupted from across the canyon as Dutch and Cole opened up. Men in the camp fell. Others dove behind rocks and started shooting back. The narrow canyon became a killing ground, muzzle flashes lighting the darkness like deadly fireflies. Elena fired into the chaos below, not sure if she hit anything, just pulling the trigger again and again until the pistol was empty. She fumbled to reload, her hands clumsy with fear. Caleb was firing methodically, each shot deliberate. A man fell, then another. His face was emotionless, mechanical. Through the smoke and confusion, Elena saw Crow trying to retreat deeper into the canyon. Silas saw it too. "He's running!" Silas vaulted over the boulder and charged down into the camp. "Silas, wait!" Caleb shouted. But Silas was already gone, firing as he ran, men scattering before him like he was something out of a nightmare. Caleb swore and followed. Elena hesitated for just a moment, then ran after them both. The canyon floor was chaos. Bodies lying in the snow, wounded men crawling for cover, the air thick with gun smoke and the copper smell of blood. Elena kept low, staying behind Caleb, her reloaded pistol ready. Ahead, she saw Silas corner Crow against the canyon wall. Crow had a pistol, but his hand was shaking. He fired and missed. Silas didn't. The shot hit Crow in the leg and he went down screaming. Silas stood over him, rifle pointed at his head. "Wait!" Elena shouted. She didn't know why, didn't know what she was trying to stop, but something in her recoiled at executing a wounded man. Silas looked back at her. "He killed Caleb's wife. Tried to kill all of you. You want me to let him go? I want—" Elena didn't know what she wanted. Justice, safety, an end to the violence. "I want him to face consequences. Real ones. Not just a bullet in the dark. There are no consequences out here except the ones we make." Silas turned back to Crow. "Isn't that right, Victor?" Crow was clutching his leg, blood seeping through his fingers. "You're making a mistake. I've got friends, powerful friends. They'll come for you." "Let them come." Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. "No!" Caleb appeared beside them. His rifle was pointed at Crow, but his eyes were on Silas. "She's right. Not like this. You want justice? This is justice. This is revenge. There's a difference." Caleb's voice was hard but certain. "We take him to the territorial marshal. Let the law handle it." "The law?" Silas laughed. "The law doesn't reach this far. You know that. Then we make it reach." Caleb looked down at Crow. "You're going to confess to all of it. The intimidation, the barn, my wife." Crow spat blood. "Go to hell." "Already there," Caleb said. "The question is whether you're coming with me or facing a rope in front of witnesses." He glanced around the canyon. Most of Crow's men were dead or wounded. The few still standing had their hands up. "Your choice." Crow looked between Caleb, Silas, and Elena. Whatever he saw in their faces made something inside him break. "Fine. I'll confess, just stop the bleeding." They bound Crow's wound and tied his hands. Dutch and Cole rounded up the surviving men, only 4 of them left alive and uninjured. The rest were casualties of a battle Crow had started and lost. "We should burn this camp," Dutch said. "Send a message." "No," Elena said. "We've sent enough messages." She looked at the bodies scattered across the canyon floor and felt sick. "This ends here. No more burning, no more killing." Silas studied her. "You've got a soft heart for someone who just helped win a war." "This wasn't a war, it was survival." Elena turned away from the carnage. "And I'm done surviving like this." They rode back to the ranch as dawn broke over the mountains. Crow sat on a horse with his hands bound, flanked by Silas's men. He didn't speak, didn't look at anyone. The fight had gone out of him. When they crested the final ridge and saw the ranch below, Elena felt something loosen in her chest. The house was still standing, the barn intact. Smoke rose from the chimney, meaning someone inside had kept the fire going. The children were waiting on the porch. When they saw Caleb, they ran toward him, and he dismounted to catch them, his face finally showing something other than grim determination. Mary wrapped her arms around Elena's waist. "You came back. I told you I would. Is it over?" Elena looked at Crow sitting defeated on his horse, at Silas and his men preparing to ride on, at Caleb holding his children like they were the only real things in the world. "Yes," she said. "It's over." They turned Crow over to the territorial marshal 3 days later. With testimony from Caleb, Elena, and the surviving men who'd witnessed Crow's orders, the case was solid. Crow would hang or spend the rest of his life in prison. Either way, he'd never threaten anyone again. Silas and his men left the morning after the battle. Elena walked out to see him off. "You did good," Silas said. "Your mother would be proud. I called you here to help defend a home. Instead, I turned it into a battlefield. You turned it into a place worth fighting for. Big difference." He adjusted his hat. "You ever need anything else, you know where to find me. Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me. You saved yourself. I just provided firepower." He looked past her to where Caleb was working on repairs to the barn with Wyatt helping. "You planning to stay?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do. You've known since the first night." Silas smiled. "Take care of them. They need you. And I think you need them too." Then he was gone, riding south with his men like they'd never been there at all. Elena stood in the yard and looked around. The ranch bore scars from the battle. Bullet holes in the walls. Scorched earth where the bombs had exploded. Empty spaces where men had fallen. But it was still standing, and so was she. Caleb walked over, wiping his hands on his pants. "Silas get off all right?" He did. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Caleb said, "I've been thinking." "About what?" "About you. About what you've done here." He looked at her. "You saved my family, not just from Crow, from falling apart, from giving up." "I just did what needed doing." "No, you did more than that." He took a breath like he was preparing for something difficult. "When I brought you here, I told you this wasn't a family, that you were just help. I was wrong." Elena's heart started beating faster. "You've become part of this place," Caleb continued. "Part of us. The kids look to you, trust you, and I—" He stopped, struggling with words. "I don't want you to leave. Not just because we need the help, but because I can't imagine this place without you in it." "Caleb, let me finish." He ran a hand through his hair. "I'm not asking you to replace my wife. I'm asking you to be something else, something new. Whatever that looks like, partner, friend, I don't know. But stay, please." Elena looked at his face, weathered and scarred and more open than she'd ever seen it. She looked at the house behind him where Mary was teaching Thomas to read and Wyatt was carving something new from wood. She looked at the mountains rising around them and the sky vast and blue overhead. She'd been traded and sold and treated like property. She'd survived winter and violence and war. She'd killed men and saved lives and built something from nothing in the frozen wilderness. And somehow, impossibly, she'd found a place that felt like it could become home. "All right," she said, "I'll stay." Caleb's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you. On one condition." "What's that?" "Stop calling me help. I'm family now. You said it yourself." A smile crept across his face. The first real smile she'd seen from him that reached his eyes. "Deal." They walked back toward the house together, not touching, not rushing, just moving forward side by side. There was work to do, fences to mend, fields to prepare for spring, a life to rebuild from the ashes of everything that had come before. But for the first time since climbing onto that wagon months ago, Elena felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope. Spring came slower than Elena expected. The snow receded in patches, revealing brown earth and dead grass underneath. The air warmed by degrees so small you could barely notice day to day, but week by week the change became undeniable. Ice melted from the eaves, birds returned, and the ranch slowly came back to life. The work was endless. Caleb and Wyatt spent weeks repairing fence lines damaged by winter and battle. Elena and Mary scrubbed every surface in the house, washing away months of accumulated grime and the lingering smell of gun smoke. Thomas followed them around asking questions that didn't have answers. Why did the men come? Why did people have to die? When would everything be normal again? Elena never lied to him. I don't know if it'll ever be normal, she'd say, but it'll be ours, and that's better. The territorial marshal had come through twice more, taking statements and gathering evidence for Crow's trial. Word had spread through the valley about what happened. Some folks rode out to see the ranch that had stood against Victor Crow and lived to tell about it. Others stayed away, superstitious or scared or just wanting no part of the violence that had touched this place. Elena didn't blame them. 2 months after the battle, a letter arrived. Caleb read it standing in the kitchen, his face unreadable. When he finished, he set it down and looked at Elena. Crow's dead, he said. Hanged 3 days ago in Santa Fe. Elena felt nothing, not relief, not satisfaction, just a hollow kind of emptiness. Good. The marshal says some of Crow's associates are making noise about appeals and investigating what happened here. But he doesn't think it'll amount to anything. Too many witnesses, too much evidence. So it's really over. Looks like it. Caleb picked up the letter again, staring at words he'd already read. I thought I'd feel different when he was finally gone. I thought I'd feel something. What do you feel? Tired. He set the letter down. Just tired. Elena understood. The kind of tired that came from carrying weight for so long you forgot what it felt like to stand up straight. The kind that didn't go away with sleep. Then rest, she said. The work will still be here tomorrow. But Caleb didn't rest. None of them did. There was too much to do and too few hands to do it. They fell into a rhythm born of necessity. Wake before dawn. Work until dark. Eat whatever Elena could scrape together from their still meager supplies. Sleep and wake and do it again. Slowly, impossibly, the ranch started to look less like a battlefield and more like a home. Elena planted the garden she'd promised Thomas. It was small and the soil was poor, but she worked it until her hands were raw and her back ached. Mary helped, learning which seeds went where and how deep to plant them. Thomas mostly got in the way, but his enthusiasm made up for his lack of skill. What are we growing? He asked, dropping seeds into holes Mary had carefully measured. Tomatoes, peppers, beans, some herbs if we're lucky. Elena wiped sweat from her forehead. Things that'll help us eat better come summer. Will it work? I don't know, but we're going to try. That became the answer to everything. Will the fence hold through another winter? Will the cow have another healthy calf? Will the supply wagon come on time? Will things ever get easier? I don't know, but we're going to try. One evening in late April, Caleb came in from the fields looking more troubled than usual. Elena was making dinner while Mary set the table and the boys argued about something inconsequential in the corner. Need to talk to you, Caleb said quietly. Elena wiped her hands and followed him outside. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything gold and red. It would have been beautiful if Caleb's face wasn't so grim. What's wrong? Money's running out. He said it flat, like ripping off a bandage. I spent almost everything we had on supplies and repairs. The garden won't produce for months. We need cash to make it through summer. What are you thinking? There's work in Tierra Amarilla, construction crew building a new church. They're paying decent wages. He looked toward the house. I could go, work for a few months, send money back. And leave us alone here? I don't want to, but I don't see another option. Elena thought for a moment. What if we had something to sell? We've got nothing worth selling. What about land? Caleb's face darkened. I'm not selling to land grabbers. We didn't fight a war just to give up pieces of the ranch. Not selling, leasing. Elena had been thinking about this for weeks, ever since she'd seen the vast empty fields surrounding the property. There's families that need grazing land. They'd pay for the right to run cattle or sheep on our property. We keep the land but make money off it. Caleb considered this. That could work, but who'd manage it? Make sure they're not overgrazing or damaging fences? I would. Elena, I can do it. You've taught me about the land, about what it can handle. I can ride the property, check on the lessees, collect payments. She looked at him. You don't have to leave. We can do this together. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Not quite hope, but close to it. You really think it'll work? I don't know, but we're going to try. They spent the next month riding to neighboring properties, talking to ranchers who needed land but couldn't afford to buy. The response was better than Elena expected. 2 families signed on immediately. A third wanted time to think about it but seemed interested. By June, they had enough agreements to bring in steady income. Not a fortune, but enough to buy supplies and pay for repairs and maybe, just maybe, build something sustainable. The garden produced. Not abundantly, but enough. The first tomatoes came in early July, and Elena made sauce that tasted better than anything they'd eaten all year. Thomas ate until his stomach hurt and declared it the best food he'd ever had. Better than Mama's? Mary asked quietly. Thomas thought about it with the seriousness only children can bring to impossible questions. Different, but still good. Mary nodded. That was enough. Wyatt had changed more than anyone. The angry boy who'd hated Elena on sight had gradually, grudgingly, become something else. He still had his hard edges, but they'd dulled. He talked more. Smiled occasionally. Once Elena caught him singing while working on fence repairs, an old song his mother used to sing, and when he realized she'd heard him, he didn't stop. Just kept singing like it was the most natural thing in the world. One afternoon, he came to find Elena in the garden. She was pulling weeds, her hands caked in dirt, sweat running down her face. Need help? He asked. Elena looked up, surprised. Wyatt usually avoided the garden, claiming it was women's work. Sure. Grab that section there. They worked in silence for a while. Then Wyatt said, I'm sorry. For what? For how I was. When you first came here, the things I said. He pulled a weed with more force than necessary. I was angry, at Pa for bringing you here, at Mama for dying, at everything. I know. I thought you were trying to replace her, but you weren't. You were just trying to survive, same as us. He looked at her. You're not my mother. You'll never be my mother. But you're family, and I should have seen that sooner. Elena felt her throat tighten. Thank you for telling me that. I carved you something. He pulled a small wooden figure from his pocket. It was rough but recognizable. A woman in a dress holding a basket. For the garden. So you remember that some of us appreciate what you did. Elena took it carefully. The wood was warm from being in his pocket. It's beautiful. It's not, but it's honest. He stood and brushed dirt from his knees. That's all I've got. After he left, Elena sat in the garden holding the carved figure and cried. Not from sadness, from the overwhelming weight of being seen and accepted and called family by someone who'd hated her so completely just months before. That night at dinner, Caleb made an announcement. The land papers came through. Ranch is officially ours, free and clear. No debts, no claims against it. What about Crow's estate? Elena asked. Can't his family contest? Marshall says no. Between the attempted murder charges and the evidence we provided, the territorial court invalidated all his land claims in this area. Everything he took through intimidation and violence got redistributed. Caleb looked around the table. We're safe. Finally. Mary started crying. Thomas asked what it meant. Wyatt just nodded like he'd expected nothing less. Elena felt something settle inside her. A tension she'd been carrying since that first wagon ride finally releasing. So what do we do now? Mary asked through her tears. Whatever we want, Caleb said. This is our land, our home. We build it into whatever we think it should be. The conversation that followed stretched late into the night. Ideas piled on top of each other. They could expand the garden, raise more livestock, build a proper barn to replace the one that was falling apart. Maybe someday add rooms to the house. Maybe even help other families getting started in the valley. We could build a school, Mary said suddenly. There's no school for miles. Kids have to go all the way to Tierra Amarilla, and half of them don't bother. Where would we build it? Wyatt asked. On the eastern section, near the road so families can reach it easy. Elena looked at Mary's excited face and felt something warm bloom in her chest. That's a good idea. You think so? I think it's a great idea, if we can afford it. We could do it slowly, Caleb said, little by little. Maybe by next year we'd have something basic. 4 walls and a roof. That's all you really need. The conversation continued until Thomas fell asleep at the table and had to be carried to bed. Elena tucked him in and found Mary already asleep in the next bed over, a smile still on her face. When she came back out, Caleb was standing on the porch looking at the stars. Elena joined him. You think we can actually do all that? She asked. The school, the improvements, everything? I think if we can survive what we've already survived, we can survive anything. He turned to look at her. I need to tell you something. All right. When my wife died, I died with her. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. I stopped seeing a future, stopped caring about anything except getting through each day. He paused. You brought me back. Not by replacing her or making me forget, but by showing me that life doesn't end just because you want it to, that there's still things worth fighting for. Elena didn't know what to say to that. I'm not asking for anything, Caleb continued. I just wanted you to know what you did here, what you still do every day. It matters. You would have figured it out eventually, you and the kids. Maybe, but I don't think we would have survived long enough to get there. He looked back at the stars. You saved us, Elena. In every way a person can be saved. They stood in comfortable silence, the night sounds of the ranch surrounding them. An owl called from the barn. The horses shifted in their stalls. Somewhere in the distance a coyote sang to the moon. I have something to ask you, Caleb said after a while. And you can say no. I'll understand if you do. Elena's heart started beating faster. This arrangement we have, you working here, living here, being part of the family, I want to make it official. He turned to face her fully. I'm asking you to marry me, not because you're a replacement for what I lost, but because you're something new. Something I didn't know I needed until you were here. Elena had known this was coming, had seen it building in the way Caleb looked at her, the way he relied on her judgment, the way they'd become partners in running the ranch. But knowing it was coming and hearing the actual words were different things. I need to be honest with you, she said. I don't love you, not the way you loved your wife. I know, but I care about you, about the kids, about this place. She looked at the house behind them, at the garden she'd planted, at the mountains rising against the stars. This has become my home, and I don't want to leave it. Is that a yes? It's a yes, but not for romance or love or anything like that. It's a yes because we're good partners, because we make each other stronger, because together we built something worth keeping. She met his eyes. Is that enough for you? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, My wife and I had the kind of love people write songs about. It was fire and passion and all-consuming, and when she died, it nearly destroyed me. He reached out and took Elena's hand. What you're offering is different, steadier, built on respect and shared purpose instead of romance. And right now that sounds like exactly what I need. So we're agreed? This is a partnership, not a love story. Agreed. He squeezed her hand gently. Though maybe someday it could become both. If we're lucky. Elena smiled. Maybe, but let's not count on it. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. No church, no fancy dress, no grand celebration. Just Elena and Caleb standing in front of a traveling minister with the children as witnesses and a handful of neighbors who'd become friends. Mary cried. Thomas wanted to know if this meant Elena was really his mother now. Wyatt carved them a set of wooden candlesticks as a wedding gift and tried to pretend he hadn't spent weeks making them perfect. The minister pronounced them married, and Caleb kissed Elena's cheek chastely, like sealing a business deal rather than a romance. It should have felt wrong or empty or disappointing. Instead, it felt exactly right. That summer, they broke ground on the schoolhouse. It was slow work, done in spare hours between all the other tasks that needed doing. But gradually, walls rose. A roof took shape. Windows were installed, glass shipped all the way from Santa Fe at enormous expense, but worth it to let light into the single classroom. Elena taught herself to read better so she could teach others. She ordered books from catalogs and practiced lessons on Thomas and Mary until she felt confident enough to stand in front of other children. The school opened in September, 7 students the first day, all of them from families working land nearby. Elena stood in front of them with her heart hammering and her mouth dry and taught them letters and numbers and the beginning of everything else they'd need to know. Some days were disasters. The younger children wouldn't sit still. The older ones thought they knew everything already. Elena went home exhausted and doubting every choice she'd made, but she came back the next day, and the day after that, and slowly, incredibly, the children started learning. By October, they had 12 students. By November, 15. Parents started asking if Elena could teach adults too, those who'd never learned to read and were ashamed of it but desperate to change. So she started evening classes. 2 nights a week, grown men and women sitting at desks meant for children, struggling through basic primers with the determination of people who'd been denied something essential and now had a chance to claim it. The ranch expanded. They bought more livestock with money from the leases. They built a second barn. They hired occasional help during busy seasons, paying fair wages because Elena insisted and Caleb agreed. Winter came again, but this time they were ready. Full pantries, solid buildings, enough firewood to last until spring. They spent the long, dark months working on indoor projects and teaching and planning for the year ahead. Caleb's cough started in January. Just a small thing at first, easy to dismiss as winter cold or dust from working in the barn. But it lingered. Got worse. By February, he was struggling to catch his breath after even light work. Elena made him see the doctor in Tierra Amarilla. The man listened to Caleb's lungs and looked grave. Consumption, he said. Early stages still, but it's there. Elena felt the world tilt. Can you treat it? I can try. Rest, good food, clean air. Some people recover, others don't. The doctor looked at Caleb. You need to stop working so hard. Let others carry the load for a while. Caleb laughed, which turned into a coughing fit. When he could breathe again, he said, I've got a ranch to run. You've got a wife and children who need you alive more than they need a perfectly maintained ranch, Elena said. You're going to rest. I'll handle everything else. Elena, I'm not asking. So Caleb rested, or tried to. It went against every instinct he had, but Elena was relentless. She took over the heavy work, hiring help when she couldn't manage alone. She kept the ranch running through force of will and determination. The children stepped up too. Wyatt, nearly 16 now, took on more responsibility. Mary managed the household. Even Thomas, still young, helped where he could. Spring came and Caleb improved. The cough receded. He started working again, carefully at first, building back his strength. The doctor pronounced him in recovery but warned it could come back. Consumption was like that. Sometimes it left. Sometimes it just waited. We should sell, Caleb said one night. Take the money and move somewhere easier, somewhere that won't kill me slowly. No, Elena said. No, we didn't fight this hard to give up now. We'll adapt, hire more help, maybe get Wyatt to take over more of the physical work. But we're not leaving. Why? It's just land, Elena. It's not just land, it's proof that people like us can build something and keep it. It's home for children who've already lost too much. It's a school teaching kids who'd otherwise grow up ignorant. She looked at him. It's everything we fought for, and I'm not walking away from it. Caleb smiled. It was tired, but genuine. You've gotten stubborn. I learned from the best. He reached over and took her hand. They'd been married nearly 2 years, and their relationship had settled into something comfortable. Not passionate love, but deep partnership. They shared a bed, but rarely more than that. They made decisions together, raised the children together, built a life together. It wasn't what either of them had imagined, but it worked. That summer, Caleb taught Wyatt everything about running the ranch. How to assess livestock, negotiate leases, manage money, preparing him to take over eventually, whether that was in a year or 10 years or 50. You think I'm dying, Wyatt said one evening. Caleb didn't lie to him. I think I'm mortal. And I think you need to be ready for whenever that mortality catches up to me. I don't know if I can do this without you. Yes, you can. You've got your mother's strength and your own good sense. And you've got Elena, who's tougher than both of us combined. Caleb put a hand on his son's shoulder. You'll be fine. Better than fine. Fall came with cooler air and harvest. The garden produced more than expected. The leases brought in steady income. The school had 20 students now, plus evening classes that were always full. One October evening, Elena stood on the porch watching the sunset and taking stock. The ranch was thriving. The children were healthy and growing. The community they'd built was strong. They'd turned a place of violence and death into something that gave life. Caleb joined her, moving slower than he used to, but moving nonetheless. What are you thinking about? Everything. Nothing. Elena leaned against the railing. Remember when I first came here, how broken everything was? I remember. Sometimes I can't believe we made it through. We almost didn't. But we did. Elena turned to look at him. And we built something better than what was here before. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. Caleb was quiet for a moment. I need to tell you something. Elena's stomach dropped. You're getting worse. No, I'm actually feeling better than I have in months, he smiled. What I need to tell you is thank you. For what? For saving me when I couldn't save myself. For loving my children when I was too lost in grief to love them properly. For turning this ranch into a home instead of just a place we survived. He took her hand. You gave me a second life, Elena. One I didn't think I deserved. And I'm grateful for every day of it. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. You gave me a home when I had nowhere else to go. I think that makes us even. Not even close, but I'll take it. They stood together as darkness fell and the first stars appeared. Inside the house, Elena could hear the children arguing about something trivial, the sound of a family comfortable enough to bicker. The ranch spread out around them, not perfect, but theirs. Hard-won and held against all odds. Time passed the way it does, days into weeks, into months, into years. Caleb's health fluctuated, but he held on, stubborn and determined. The children grew. Wyatt became a man, taking on more responsibility until he was effectively running the ranch with Caleb as advisor. Mary discovered she had a talent for healing and started apprenticing with the doctor in town. Thomas remained cheerful and optimistic, seeing good in everything even when it wasn't there. The school grew too. They added a second room, hired another teacher, started offering more advanced classes. Children who'd learned to read in Elena's classroom went on to attend university in Santa Fe or Denver. Some came back to teach. Others spread across the territory, carrying with them the knowledge that education was possible for everyone, not just the wealthy. 5 years after the battle with Crow, a young couple came to the ranch looking for help. They'd been run off their land by a man trying to consolidate property, and they'd heard that Elena and Caleb had fought back successfully against similar threats. We don't know what to do, the woman said. Her name was Sarah, and she was maybe 20, her face worn beyond her years. We've got 2 babies and nowhere to go. Elena looked at Caleb. He looked back. The same thought passed between them without words. You can stay here, Elena said. We've got room in the barn until we can build you something better. And we've got work if you're willing. We'll work, the husband said quickly. Whatever you need. Just one condition, Caleb added. You fight for this place if it comes to that. Defend it like it's your own. Because out here, we take care of each other. That's how we survive. They stayed, and they weren't the last. Over the years, others came. Families fleeing violence or poverty or just bad luck. Elena and Caleb took them in, gave them work and shelter, helped them get back on their feet. Some stayed permanently. Others moved on once they were stable. But everyone who passed through carried away the knowledge that there were people in the mountains who'd fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The ranch became more than just a ranch. It became a community, a refuge, a place where the broken could heal and the lost could find direction. Elena stood in the garden one spring morning, 10 years after she'd first arrived. Her hands were still rough from work, but they were capable hands. Strong hands, hands that had planted and fought and built and healed. She heard footsteps and turned to find Caleb approaching. He moved carefully now, his body bearing the weight of years and illness, but he was still here, still fighting. The land papers came, he said, holding an official-looking envelope. Making you co-owner of everything. Ranch, buildings, livestock, all of it. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. You've earned it 1,000 times over. He handed her the papers. Besides, when I'm gone, I want to make sure no one can contest your claim. This land is as much yours as it ever was mine. Elena took the papers but didn't look at them. She was looking at Caleb's face instead, seeing past the age and illness to the man who'd taken a chance on a woman he'd bought for $40 and ended up with a partner who'd changed his entire life. "You're not going anywhere," she said. "Not today, but someday." He smiled. "And when that day comes, I'll go knowing I left things in good hands." 3 years later, Caleb died in his sleep. Peaceful and quiet, the way he'd wanted. The whole valley came to the funeral. Families they'd helped, students Elena had taught, people who'd heard stories about the ranch that stood against Victor Crow and became something more. They buried him next to his first wife on the hill overlooking the property. Elena stood at the grave and said goodbye to the man who'd given her a home and let her make it into something neither of them could have imagined. Wyatt put his arm around her shoulders. "You all right?" "No, but I will be." "What happens now?" Elena looked at the ranch spreading below them, the house they'd expanded twice, the 2 barns, both solid and well-maintained, the school with its 3 rooms and 4 teachers, the fields green with spring growth, the family's working land that used to sit empty. "Now we keep going," she said. "We honor him by doing what he'd want, taking care of this place, taking care of each other. That's what you've always done." "Then I guess nothing changes." But things did change. They always did. Elena turned more of the daily operations over to Wyatt while she focused on the school and helping new families get established. Mary returned from her medical training and opened a clinic on the ranch, offering care to people who couldn't afford the doctors in town. Thomas, restless and adventurous, went to work on the railroad but came home every few months with stories and money he insisted on investing in the ranch. The years passed. Elena's hair went gray. Her hands developed arthritis that made fine work difficult. But she kept teaching, kept building, kept helping. The ranch prospered not because it was easy, but because everyone who lived there understood the cost of what they'd built and was willing to pay it. On her 60th birthday, Elena stood in front of the school and looked at the plaque someone had mounted beside the door. Mercer Ranch School, it read, founded by Elena Mercer, open to all. "You don't like it?" Mary asked. She'd arranged for the plaque as a gift. "It's strange seeing my name on things." Elena touched the metal, warm from the sun. "I'm just someone who did what needed doing." "You're someone who changed everything. For us. For this whole valley." Mary hugged her. "That deserves recognition." That evening, the whole community gathered for a celebration. Dozens of people, maybe 100, all connected to the ranch in some way. Former students who'd become teachers, doctors, lawyers, families who'd found refuge here and stayed, children who'd been born on this land and known nothing else. They ate and drank and told stories. About the battle with Crow, now legendary and probably half invented. About Elena's first winter here when she'd arrived with nothing and somehow made it work. About Caleb and his quiet strength. About all the years between then and now. Elena sat and listened and felt the weight of everything she'd done settle on her shoulders. Not heavy, just present, real, undeniable. An old man she didn't recognize approached. He walked with a cane and his face was weathered beyond recognition. "You don't remember me," he said. "I'm sorry. I don't. I was one of Crow's men, at the battle. I got shot, and you could have killed me, but you didn't. You let me surrender." He looked at the ranch around them. "I heard what you built here, wanted to see it for myself before I died." Elena studied his face and found only sincerity. "Do you regret it? Working for him?" "Every day of my life, but I've tried to do better since. Tried to help people instead of hurt them." He held out his hand. "Wanted to say thank you for giving me the chance." Elena shook his hand. "We all deserve second chances. I got mine. So did everyone here." He nodded and walked away, and Elena watched him go with the understanding that mercy wasn't weakness. That choosing not to kill when you had the power to do so was its own kind of strength. The celebration went late into the night. Elena eventually retired to the house, tired but content. She sat in the chair by the window where she'd sat 1,000 times before and looked out at the land she'd fought for. A soft knock came at the door. Wyatt entered, now in his 30s, with a family of his own. "Thought you might want company," he said. "Always." He sat across from her. "I've been thinking about what to tell my kids, about where this place came from, what it means." "What have you come up with?" "That home isn't something you're born into. It's something you build. Sometimes with your hands, sometimes with your choices, but always with determination." He looked at her. "You taught me that. You and Pa both. Your father taught you more than I ever could. He taught me about ranching, about honor and hard work. But you taught me that family doesn't have to be blood. That love can grow from partnership and respect just as well as romance." Wyatt smiled. "You taught me that a woman bought for $40 can become the foundation on which everything else is built." Elena's throat tightened. "I just did what I had to do." "No, you did more. You did what most people wouldn't. And because of that, dozens of families have homes. Hundreds of kids can read. This whole valley is different." He reached over and took her hand. "Thank you for everything." After he left, Elena sat alone in the quiet house and let herself feel the full weight of the life she'd lived. She'd been traded like property. She'd survived winter and violence and loss. She'd killed men and saved lives. She'd built a school and a community and a legacy that would outlast her. It hadn't been the life she'd imagined as a girl. It hadn't been easy or perfect or anything like the stories people told about romance and happiness. But it had been hers, earned through blood and sweat and stubborn refusal to give up when giving up would have been easier. She thought about the girl who'd climbed onto that wagon so many years ago, frightened and alone and convinced she was worth nothing. If she could talk to that girl now, what would she say? That it gets better, that you're stronger than you know, that home isn't a place you find but a place you make, that sometimes being bought is just the beginning of buying yourself back. Elena stood and walked to the mirror. The woman looking back was old and weathered and scarred in ways both visible and not, but her eyes were clear. Her spine was straight, and when she smiled, it reached all the way to those clear eyes. She'd been bought for $40, but she'd made herself priceless. And that, Elena thought as she turned away from the mirror and headed to bed, was worth every moment of the fight. Outside the window, the ranch spread beneath a sky full of stars, fields and buildings and fences, all holding together through will and work. Tomorrow, there would be more work, more challenges, more moments where giving up would be easier than going on. But Elena had never been good at taking the easy path, and she wasn't about to start now.